Carlson tonight. We want to give you a quick update on the latest in the shooting investigations. We're going to go to Fox Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry, who is in South Florida tonight. Hey, Ed.
Tucker, good to see you. An affidavit out new tonight from the Broward County Sheriff shows, in fact, that the suspect told the police that he was the shooter, basically confessing to this, what everybody already knew. And I can tell you, yes, that death toll still stands at 17, far too high. But there were a lot of people here on the ground who thought it might climb some more because of the carnage they were seeing yesterday. But for the fact that you had a remarkable number of people at the hospital behind me who worked through the night on people who were going through surgery in critical condition, and they basically saved their lives. And for the first time, we talked to those doctors today to tell us about what it was like when they called that code green, all hands on deck, to deal with patient after patient, as we're also getting harrowing experiences from students inside that high school. Listen.
We kept on getting phone calls. Are you ready to receive more patients? Are you ready to take this one? Are you ready to take that one?
I'm still scared. Like I just have that image, like that sound of the gunshots right in my head. Like I just hear it like constantly.
He stopped us, and he got us into Chef Kurth with Chef Kurth's help into her classroom. I would say about 30 to 40 students into this teacher's classroom at the same time. And as a result of their heroic actions, they saved probably all of our lives, about 40 of us.
Listen to that last student talking about a janitor, an unsung hero in all of this, who realized that when the shooter pulled the fire alarm, there were about 40 barricaded students, as you heard there, who then rushed right towards the shooter. They didn't realize it at first. The janitor told them to turn around. They went into another room. They went to safety. They believe 40 more could have been killed. Again, 17, far too many. But I can tell you a glimmer of hope tonight, Tucker, which is that despite all of the patients last night who were in critical condition here, tonight there's only one in critical condition, and they're hopeful that it will soon be zero and that everyone will be getting out and going home very soon. Tucker.
Ed Henry for us in Florida. Thanks a lot, Ed. Decent person is horrified by what happened yesterday in Parkland. Every thoughtful person knows something horrible is going on in American society. Tragedies like this happen for a reason, and it probably doesn't have a lot to do with guns. The percentage of American households with firearms has dropped dramatically over the past 35 years. Meanwhile, the number of mass shootings has risen. If you're over 40, you did not grow up in a country like this. So the question is, what happened? It could be a lot of things. Far more Americans than ever before take psychiatric medications. Are outbursts of violence a potential side effect? We don't know, but it's possible. Does the social atomization of modern society play a role in all this? Well, spending life online does cause alienation. We know that. Last week, we interviewed author Johann Hari, who has studied the dramatic rise of depression in this country. As he pointed out, the most common answer to the question, how many close friends do you have, is now zero. The lack of meaningful relationships does cause despair. Perhaps in rare cases, it drives some to mass murder. Meanwhile, the nuclear family has collapsed nationwide. Does a generation of boys growing up without fathers pose a threat to this country? Of course it does. Why wouldn't it? Fatherlessness is one feature common to many mass shooters. Nobody's surprised by that. And what about men more broadly? As a group, men are not thriving in this country right now. Ignore the propaganda, and there's a lot of it, and instead look at the numbers. Men kill themselves more, graduate less, and of course commit pretty much 100% of mass shootings. It's a disaster, which for some reason our elites persist in ignoring. In March, this show will begin a month-long series every Wednesday on what is happening to men. We hope it'll be interesting. But why haven't we been talking about this for years? Now, we're not saying any of these factors caused the massacre we saw yesterday. We don't know that. We are saying we ought to do our honest best as a nation to figure out what exactly is going on here. But we're not doing that. That vital conversation has been drowned out and made impossible by mindless screeching about gun control led by blustery charlatans in the media, you know exactly who they are, and also in Congress, whose only real agenda is moral preening. They aren't trying to solve the problem. Their aims are darker than that. Press a little bit and you'll see it. Sensible gun reforms, you hear that phrase a lot. You heard it all day today on cable news. What exactly does that mean, sensible gun reforms? Banning bump stocks? No. A piece on Vox.com today calls for a landmark gun control bill like the one Australia passed 22 years ago in 1996. That's the law that liberals are always telling you about. But the Australian law wasn't gun control, and it wasn't a voluntary buyback, no matter what they tell you. It was gun confiscation, a wholesale mandatory disarmament of the entire civilian population. Imagine what would happen if you tried that here in this country. America is not Australia for a bunch of reasons, including our history and our Bill of Rights. Imagine federal officials marching from house to house, seizing hundreds of millions of firearms from law-abiding citizens, and then fining and imprisoning those who resist. Vox approvingly calls this leadership. In fact, it's a recipe for bloodshed and civil war. It's nuts. Yet it is a common fantasy on the left. Dan Pfeiffer was a senior advisor to Barack Obama. Now he's a contributor at CNN, of course. Last fall, Pfeiffer wrote an article attacking his fellow Democrats for what he bluntly called fake moderation on guns. His advice was this: stop pretending to respect the Constitution and instead focusing on appointing judges who will nullify it. The goal? Gun seizures, ammunition regulation, the disarmament of the American population, a country where only the people in charge have guns and everybody else obeys. In the wake of yesterday's shooting, Pfeiffer's piece is going viral on the left. What he wrote is what they believe. So let's stop lying about this. The calls you're hearing today for gun control have nothing to do with protecting Americans from violence. What you're witnessing is a kind of class war. The left hates rural America, red America, gun-owning America, the America that elected Donald Trump. They hate them. Progressives are still in charge of most of the major institutions in this country, and they despise the autonomy of an armed population. They want collective punishment for the sins of a few. They seek to obliterate a core constitutional right rather than trying to mitigate its downsides. They call it gun control, but it's not. It's people control. For the left, voters who can't be controlled can't be trusted. So why have we seen such a massive increase, what seems like one, in shootings like this? Tom Kirsting is a psychotherapist and school counselor. Judge Alex Farrar is a former Miami-Dade County judge, and they both join us tonight. Judge, to you first. We're going to find out a lot more in this specific case because unusually the shooter is still alive. But more broadly, we have seen in absolute terms a pretty big spike in shootings like this. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, it'd be very difficult to just go ahead and jump into the mind of these shooters and come up with a very simple explanation for why they're behaving that way. Clearly, society has changed in its relationship with violence. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, there was nowhere near the level of violence we have today. We certainly had guns back then, but we didn't have the level of violence we have today. So I think in some ways, society has become very desensitized to violence. And I did see back then as a police officer, parents taking a much more key role in educating their kids about right and wrong. We seem to have lost that line of distinction between right and wrong. Not to say that that clearly applies to this case, because nobody would ever think that it's right to do this horrific act. But I think, like Mayor Giuliani discussed, it's the little things that lead to the big things. And as a judge, I used to tell the parents who come in my courtroom, you can either discipline your child now, or somebody like me is going to be disciplining them much later. And that discipline is going to be a lot harder to deal with because it is a rolling stone. And once it starts moving, you know, culture does change. And we see culture now being very violent, very, I would say, desensitized to it, where it doesn't faze them anymore.
Clearly. I mean, Tom, guns are not magic. They're tools. They don't operate themselves. Attitudes are what matter, and attitudes have changed. How have they changed, do you think?
Well, here's what I think, Tucker, right? So the society we live in is not the society I lived in growing up as a kid. This generation is being raised by social media and smartphones, and they're not spending enough time part of the family dynamic. And the kind of content, we see it. I mean, if you go on social media, whether it's just, you know, the hatred from, you know, people's views and so forth, we see this anger and this hatred that's occurring that's getting into people's minds. That takes somebody who's mentally ill, like the shooter, okay? Imagine him absorbing hours and hours a day of video content, which is what I would presume he did, and I think we're going to see that. I really believe that. And imagine what that's doing to his mind, all right? Our actions as human beings are a reflection of what's spinning around upstairs in our minds. So we've got to get back to the basics of families. Parents need to sit down with their kids every night, get back to the dinner table, and have what the president said today, deep, meaningful interactions with one another.
I think that sounds right. Judge, why isn't there a national conversation about this? It seems like something it's important and it's an obvious problem and people feel like there's something deeply wrong with the culture that would produce something like this, but there isn't a conversation about it. Why?
I don't think it's something you can control. I think it's a lot harder to get people to change the way they're living their lives than it is to say, you know, if we just banned this type of gun, this problem would go away. And the reality is that if somebody is a homicidal maniac, if somebody is, and I completely agree with the doctor, that the sentiment out there gets created, especially in social media where there's so much hatred in today's day and age, it becomes a triggering effect. At some point, somebody snaps. So if somebody snaps and they want to kill a lot of children because they think, you know what, I'm going to become infamous, you don't need a gun to do that. Just sitting here talking to you, I can think of 3 ways right now that I could kill a lot of children if I was a homicidal maniac, and none of them would involve guns. So it's an easy answer. It's easy to say, let's ban guns and we've solved the problem, or let's ban this type of gun, because I don't think the U.S. will ever, having been founded with the Wild West, having been founded with guns, would ever get rid of all their guns. It's easy to say that. It's a lot harder to get people to change their behavior and the way that they are raising their children, and especially the way society's been kind of moving away from religion, which, like it or not, did set moral parameters for people and teach right and wrong. The other answer is a lot easier.
Yeah, I agree with that. Gentlemen, thank you both.
Thanks, Tucker.
Thank you.
The Parkland shooting appears to have happened despite some advance warning. It turns out 5 months ago, the FBI was tipped off in a way that a YouTube commenter was discussing his intent to be a professional school shooter.
And how did the FBI respond?
They responded pretty immediately. I had a field agent contact me and meet me at my office the very next morning, and unfortunately I wasn't able to provide them with much.
Well, you gave them the user's name, right, which is the same exact name as the shooter.
I'm sure had more time and effort been put into finding out who the username belongs to, if that's even possible. I don't know how many Nicholas Cruzes there are on YouTube, but they would have been able to find out who this person was.
But as you heard, the FBI was not able to identify Cruz.
In 2017, the FBI received information about a comment made on a YouTube channel. The comment simply said, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." No other information was included with that comment, which would indicate a time, location, or the true identity of the person who made the comment. The FBI conducted database reviews, checks, but was unable to further identify the person who actually made the comment.
Ron Hosko is a former FBI assistant director here in Washington, and he joins us tonight. Ron, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
What happened here, do you think?
You know, I think that at first blush, I think the FBI worked within its guidelines. The FBI is bound by a document, it's about this thick, it's known as the Dialogue. They take that Bible very seriously, and it's really a document that's meant to limit the power of the FBI, keep them from excess, and that guides when the circumstances in which they can open a case, the techniques that they can use in pursuing a case, very often when they must close a case. So we've heard that conversation with some terrorism cases that have been closed and then somebody strikes. We saw it in Boston and other places around the country. That document is intended to protect the organization. It is intended to protect you and I from FBI excesses.
So in this specific case, how did that prevent the FBI from moving forward?
Well, I suspect what happened here is, as they're working within their guidelines, there's a couple levels of cases that they can work. The lowest level of that is essentially, it's called an assessment. I have very little information to start. I do not have enough predication to start a preliminary inquiry or a full investigation and use all the FBI's tools. I have very little. The guidance of the Dialogue also does this. The FBI is a federal investigative agency. Its focus is on the federal law. That Dialogue is pointing them towards federal crimes and national security threats. And here, on its face, you may have neither of those two things. You have some words that some would say, that's freedom of speech. Right? I'm not threatening somebody directly. I'm just throwing up some hate supposition on the internet and walking away from it, stirring people up.
That's a totally fair point. I wonder, we've been pretty tough on the FBI recently on this show, and I think in a way that's warranted. But I also think in cases like this, are we vesting too much confidence in all of our law enforcement that they can prevent people bent on mass murder from committing it? That seems like a lot to ask.
Well, that is a lot to ask. First, I think law enforcement absolutely has to try to connect up.
Yeah.
And here, I do think the FBI probably owes us a little bit more clarity on what steps they took. However, if I don't like something you say on this show, and I'm sitting at the FBI, and you've been critical of them recently, they don't get to start a case on Tucker.
Oh, that's right.
And start following him, because one of those things of an authorized purpose is it can't be for protected First Amendment rights.
Now, I'm sorry, you a minute ago referenced DIAG, just for...
The DIAG, right.
DIAG. Can you just tell us what that's... Is that an acronym? What is that?
It is the FBI's investigative and operational guide.
Okay, so it's the handbook.
It's the handbook. It's this thick.
All right.
Everyone is tested on it. They hear, they get lectures on it from internal legal teams. They adhere to that. It's audited. Their conduct is audited. There's somebody looking over their shoulder to say you did this right, or you were outside of the bounds on this. And First Amendment protected speech is one of those key areas that the DIAG talks about repeatedly. And so they may have had an authorized purpose to start an assessment, but they can use very few tools. And what Rob Lasky referred to right there is open source. They can do database checks, other government agency database checks, or open source. And that's about it. This is not the type of case where you're going to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office and say, give me a stack of subpoenas, I'm going to start chasing.
So if somebody says, I may become a professional school shooter, who knows what it means, but if he said, I'm going to shoot up this school on this date, presumably the FBI...
Now you have a better starting point, right? Okay. But here, if I'm listening to those words, and I've had this experience, one of my first questions is on its face, is this prosecutable? Will the U.S. Attorney's Office take this? The answer is no.
No, it is no. Yeah, it's a shame. Ron, thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. The left is using yesterday's tragedy as a pretext for disarming the population. No surprises there. Up next, we'll meet someone who thinks that's a good idea. Stay tuned. Well, as is now well-established tradition, a mass shooting quickly provokes calls for aggressive new gun control from Democratic politicians.
I believe in the Constitution, but no right is absolute, and common sense measures consistent with the Second Amendment are absolutely acceptable under our laws.
In states and communities that have looser and laxer gun laws, there are more gun crimes committed.
I have said over and over, I'd rather pass gun safety legislation than win the election.
Ethan Behrman is a California radio show host, and he joins us. Now, Ethan, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker.
So the 1996 Australian example is something that liberals often mention. We said at the top of the show that Dan Pfeiffer, the assistant to President Obama and now a CNN talker, wrote a piece several months ago going around today about how that's a model for this country, the gun buyback, which was mandatory, so gun confiscation. So there are hundreds of millions of firearms in the United States. What do you think would happen if liberal dreams came true and federal agents tried to confiscate hundreds of millions of privately owned weapons in this country?
That's not the right approach. And by the way, I don't actually agree with the Australian example. I use Germany, Finland, and Switzerland as the examples, and even Israel for that matter, which is where they have psychological background exams before you're issued the license to have your firearm. Switzerland has half as many firearms as we do, but they have 0 school shootings. Why is that? And they even have semi-automatic rifles. So the question becomes, what are we doing to make sure people who shouldn't have firearms don't have firearms? And that is where we need to be addressing laws.
I wonder though,
let's be honest, Tucker.
It's interesting. I mean, there are so many, and the Swiss example is a great one. There's a very high percentage of gun ownership there. The government actually encourages people to have weapons at home, as in effect a militia. But you have very few mass shootings, and in fact, very little crime. I'm wondering why there are no calls from the left to ask real questions about American culture, and does the collapse of family structure, millennia-old family structures, maybe something to do with this, or the fact that, a quarter of the population's on psychotropic drugs, or obvious things. Why does no liberal ever mention those? It's always about taking my firearms away. Why is that, I wonder?
Well, I mean, there is something to be to what you're saying, but let's talk about it from a bigger picture then. If you're going to go down that route, there were significant changes that happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, not just affecting the family, but also in terms of consumption of drugs that are actually prescribed by doctors for children.
That's what I'm saying.
We have
That's
things
exactly
like social
what I'm talking
media.
about. I agree completely.
Yeah.
But what's so interesting is look, and I don't know the answer to this. I'm not a social scientist, but I've lived here almost 50 years, and I've seen how the country has changed. Guns are tools. You can do with them a lot of different things. They don't shoot themselves. It's silly. I mean, honestly, though, and we've had semi-automatic weapons for both of our lifetimes, and they haven't been misused like this. So why is this willful blindness to obvious causes and instead blaming the tool? That makes me suspicious. Can you see why?
Well, I can, but I want to disagree with you on something. Why would you give somebody, let's say, that doesn't know how to hammer a nail, give them an automatic nail gun, and so they're going to accidentally shoot themselves with that? That's the same idea here with 100-round magazines. Bump stocks are absolutely meaningless and useless things that are just done to circumvent automatic weapons laws. Okay, there are common sense things that we can do to minimize the damage, Tucker. Minimize it.
It's not real. Look, it's not real. There's one crime ever that I'm aware of ever in the United States in our history that was committed with the bump stock. I don't have any emotional attachment to bump stocks. They're stupid. They destroy your accuracy, whatever.
Right.
But that's so far from the actual point, which is what's going on to our society that would cause a 19-year-old boy to shoot his former classmates. Why does no one ask that question? And all these cable news demagogues, I care more than you do. But nobody asks the real questions. Why? What is this anyway? Talk about avoidance.
Well, I know there are a couple of issues. This is actually a very complicated topic, and one of them is we have to change our laws regarding mental health care and getting people that you and I have talked about before, and it relates to homelessness that you brought up before.
I agree.
Mental health care is a crisis in this country. But then the Republicans want to cut. The Trump budget wants to cut over $1 trillion out of Medicaid and Medicare.
So the Democrats close the mental hospitals. Okay, you can have the partisan debate, but I don't even care about that. I'm a father of 4. I care about the country. I want to have a real. I don't want to be infantilized with this dumb crap about, the fact that you have a deer rifle makes me less safe. That's a lie, and everyone knows it. Why are young men doing this? Maybe I don't know why, but again, why do we not have that conversation? Why are we pretending it's not real?
But because there's a two-part conversation, and you and I, interestingly enough, agree on the mental health problem that we're having. But on the second side, until we resolve that, why make it easy for them to mow down 17 lives in moments?
Because actually, I know a lot about this. I don't think that you do. The truth is, you're not allowed.
I do. I've fired AR-15s before, Tucker.
No, but the law around it. If you're adjudicated mentally ill, you cannot buy a gun. No one who has been adjudicated mentally ill, to my knowledge, in a mass shooting has been able to buy a gun. The system, as it stands, works. What do you? So do you see what I'm saying?
No, it doesn't. So the teachers knew there was a problem with this kid, and no, our mental health laws are broken. They knew there was something wrong. Teachers know who are the problem, and we're not empowering them to do something about it.
So it's really simple. Then let's be very specific in a very short amount of time. A teacher notices a kid is weird, possibly menacing. Does that mean the kid
get him counseling?
I'm not against that, but does that mean he loses his right to buy a gun as an adult? I mean, what's the answer?
And we do need to change. Yes.
If a teacher thinks you're weird, he can take away a constitutional right. I'm not arguing against it.
Once the psychologist or psychiatrist has seen you, yes.
So if you're adjudicated mentally ill, that's already the law, Ethan. That's what I don't understand. That's already the law. You should know that, right?
So we need to bridge the gap. We need to bridge the gap, Tucker. And in the meantime,
what does that mean?
I've actually called for Governor Brown here in California to call up the National Guard, station 2 National Guards people at every single school until we are able to resolve this.
Okay, that's just putting a Band-Aid on a bloody wound. But thank you, Ethan. I appreciate it, and I hope we can talk more about this. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Tucker.
Former FBI Director Jim Comey told lawmakers the FBI did not think that Mike Flynn lied to them. Huh? Flynn, by the way, could be heading to prison having pleaded guilty to lying. What is going on? What is the heart of the Russia scandal? Weirder by the moment. Byron New York joins us next. From the beginning, former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn has been at the center of the Russian collusion conspiracy theory. During the transition, the story goes, you've heard it a lot, Flynn talked to Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak and then lied about what they talked about, apparently proving the existence of a vast Russian takeover of the government. That's what you see on CNN. That's the basic account. Is it actually true? Byron New York of the Washington Examiner has been looking carefully, and he reports that in March of 2017, Then FBI Director Jim Comey told Congress he did not believe that Flynn lied to investigators about his call with Kislyak. Instead, he said any false statements by Flynn were accidental. And yet, as we said, Flynn pleaded guilty to a felony for lying about that exact thing. What happened? Byron York in studio with us tonight. Byron, this is really confusing.
It is confusing. Go back to January of last year. I mean, the papers were filled with talk about Trump and Russia. Actually, they still are.
Yes.
But they were talking about Trump and Russia and Michael Flynn and these conversations that he had in December during the transition with the Russians. So on January 24th, on a basis that a lot of Republicans are very skeptical about, the FBI goes into the White House and discusses with Michael Flynn what went on in these calls. Now, there was a lot more news after that. Remember,
with no lawyer present. This was
with no lawyer present. That was Flynn's decision. Remember, there was a lot of Republican unhappiness because the substance of that conversation, which had been the Flynn-Kislyak conversation, which had been wiretapped because we wiretapped the Russian ambassador, had been leaked to the press. So Republicans were upset about that. They demanded that the FBI director, James Comey, come up to Capitol Hill and answer some questions. And they were surprised when Comey told them that the two FBI agents who had interviewed Flynn didn't think he lied to them. And if he said anything inaccurate to them, that it was not intentional. So they took the impression, these lawmakers took the impression that, well, I guess Flynn is not going to be charged in this case. And then fast forward to December 1, he pleads guilty to doing just that, lying in that particular meeting.
Which doesn't make any sense at all. So that suggests that Mueller had a different interpretation of it and somehow convinced, or Flynn was convinced, to plead to something that Comey said he didn't do in the first place. Do you have any idea what the explanation for that could be?
Well, the big change, of course, was that President Trump fired James Comey.
Right.
And as a result of that, Robert Mueller was appointed the special counsel. He assembled a team of very aggressive prosecutors, and all of a sudden Michael Flynn is back in it. It's not clear, did they have more on Flynn, that they pressured him to do this? But you have to remember, what Flynn pled guilty to was something that all the parties knew on that day in January, because this conversation had been wiretapped. There was a recording of it, a transcript of it. And so when
But that doesn't make sense either, because Flynn was the former head of an intelligence agency.
Yes. Well, everyone thinks he surely knew that he had been recorded.
Of course, he must have done. That's what he did for a living for years, right? So of course he would know that that conversation was wiretapped. So why would he lie? How could he have lied about that?
It was kind of odd in the first place. The FBI asking, well, what did you say to the Russian ambassador, when they in fact knew exactly what he said to the Russian ambassador. And he knew that they knew, yes.
Okay. We don't know what the answer is here, but clearly this is very odd, and I look forward to the day when we find out.
And the case, by the way, is not completely over. There have been a few developments in the last few weeks of a new judge in the Flynn case ordering the Mueller office to produce evidence to Flynn, which is kind of an unusual situation in the sense that he has already pleaded guilty.
Right, and that's
so that case is not really over yet.
Ahead of time.
Yeah.
Wow, Byron York, amazing. Thank you for staying on this.
Thank you.
President Trump's tax bill gave badly needed tax relief to much of the middle class. Now the administration is considering offsetting that with a big hike to the gas tax aimed squarely at rural America. We'll discuss one of the president's more baffling policy proposals next. Well, the Trump administration just signed a significant tax cut for a lot of the middle class, but now there are calls to claw a lot of it back. Some in the administration are pushing for a major spend on infrastructure to be financed with a hike in the gas tax, the federal gas tax. That, of course, would fall heaviest on rural Americans, while leaving most of the wealthy urbanites who voted for Hillary untouched. It's a little puzzling. Peter Morici is an economist and University of Maryland business professor, and he joins us tonight. Peter, great to see you.
Nice to see you.
So I know the gas tax is something that academics love because it seems, it's tidy, it's a user fee, it seems fair. But you sort of wonder if it is fair, because really the people who pay it are not the ones who benefited from our current economic structure. They're the people who have benefited least or who've suffered under it, who live in rural America?
Well, it's people that use the roads. The alternative is tolls. I mean, the federal government's only willing to put about $200 billion into this $1.5 trillion infrastructure program. So the question is, where is the rest of the money going to come from? What the states have been doing is basically selling roads to the private sector who put on whopping tolls.
But wait a second, that's the alternative? So why do we have government? Is it to, like, run diversity seminars and, pay the retirement of federal employees? No, it's to defend the borders, to keep the Visigoths at bay, and to pave the roads. Like, that's a core function of government. And when did that become, like, an extra add-on? Do you know what I mean?
Hold on. We're on the same
page.
A
cocktail on an airplane flight.
We're on the same page. I mean, I would love to carve all the deadbeats out of the entitlements program and pay for it that way. 1 out of 20 Americans are adults. Are on Social Security disability. I can't believe that 1 out of 20 adults between 16 and 65 can't work. But the Obama administration's strategy for keeping unemployment down was to basically give everybody a disability pension.
Wait, but can we just, but I'm
saying that's where we get the money from.
I'm just saying, can we start at the beginning, which is that paving the roads is not just a core function, is maybe the core function, going back to Rome, of a government. And now they're telling us, well, we're either going to sell it to some private equity group that's going to, shaft you, or we're going to, make rural America pay more. It's just, where do we get to these choices?
Well, it's as old as the country. Back in the early days of the Republic, the towns and villages couldn't put roads up, so they would have small syndicates of farmers and artisans who'd pay for the roads because they wanted to get their products to the market, and then they'd charge tolls. So we had the turnpike period. By the way, they all went bust, and a lot of the turnpikes that we have now are going bust, including 2 that Mr. Pence established.
Well, so, but if you work backwards from first principles, here's what you get to. If we were to pass this 25-cent increase, that would instantly eliminate about 60% of the benefit that middle America got from this tax cut.
Well, it's ridiculous to go 25 cents. The gas tax right now is 18.4. Since it was last raised in 1993, we've had about 67% inflation, about 2/3. So if you raised it by 12 cents, you'd be keeping up with inflation. That would be much more reasonable. But, a lot of the gas tax is wasted. Let's forget about all the deadbeats on welfare. For example, they take some of that money for mass transit in New York or in Washington. And whenever you do that, all they do is increase civil servant salaries.
Of course.
They use it for bike paths, beautification, things of that nature.
No, but so if this were to
and then there's Davis-Bacon.
No, I couldn't agree. I'm with you on all of that stuff. But for some reason, the Chamber of Commerce is pushing this gas tax stuff. And you sort of wonder, so who uses the roads? So one of the biggest users of the roads is one of the biggest companies in the world, whose owner is the richest man in human history, Jeff Bezos of Amazon. You know what they paid in federal tax last year? Let me just do the math in my head. Oh, nothing. Nothing. According to a report for the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, Amazon paid nothing. And yet, a lot of the, that's their business, is using the roads. So why can't we just assess Amazon for this instead of assessing everyone in rural Maine and Nebraska?
Well, I don't think you'd quite get away with that, because I think you'd find that Amazon is very capable of lobbying.
Yes, you would.
Yeah, I think that's right. My feeling is there's a lot of inequities in the tax structure. For example, the carried interest. We all heard about how Mr. Trump was going to get rid of the carried interest. He said so when he was running for president. But unfortunately, Cohn, Mnuchin, and Trump benefit a great deal from it. So somehow or other it got left out of tax reform. And those guys continue to pay very low rates on their income. There are a lot of inequities in the system. We could certainly pay for the roads by cleaning up entitlements, by getting some of the still privileged loopholes out of the tax system. But unfortunately, that ain't on. And so they talk about a gas tax. I like a gas tax better than, for example, tolls and things of that nature.
Well, of course, selling public property to private companies. They did that with ticket collection here in D.C., and it's been a complete disaster. They did it with parking meters in Chicago. Same thing. But again, that shouldn't be our choice. But just really quick, 3 steps back. If this goes through, the Chamber of Commerce gets its way, and rural America has to pay the bills for Amazon, no federal taxes last year. Do you think people start to think, I'm getting the wrong end of the stick?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons it's so difficult to pass an increase in the gas tax, and that's why it hasn't gone up in over 2 decades, is simply because it is unfair that there are so many people in this country that are terribly wealthy, that don't pay a whole lot of tax.
Yeah, and like all the MSNBC hosts who ride their bicycles in from Brooklyn, they're not going to pay a single dime in this. And
maybe we'd have a bicycle tire tax. How about that one? $3
if you're
a
riding
tire.
your fixed gear in from Brooklyn, you're going to have to pay double. That's my rule. Peter, great to see you.
Take care.
Thank you. Well, it's not just politicians who were irresponsible at yesterday's shooting. Celebrities went completely over the top. Not surprisingly, Mark Stein's been paying attention. He joins us next. Various celebrities were quick to give their vacuous opinions on national gun policy in the wake of the Parkland shooting, of course. Famed constitutional law scholar Chelsea Handler tweeted this, quote, "We have to elect candidates that are not funded by the NRA in November. We have an opportunity to elect candidates who won't allow kids to go to school and get shot. It's disgusting how many times this has happened, and Republicans do nothing. You all have blood on your hands," she said in measured tones. Meanwhile, elder statesman Kim Kardashian West tweeted this, quote, "We owe it to our children and our teachers to keep them safe while at school. Prayers won't do this, action will. Congress, please do your job. Protect Americans from senseless gun violence." That was written by a publicist, you can tell. And there are a lot of other tweets in that same vein. Author and columnist Mark Stein specializes in celebrity tweets. Indeed, he's compiling a book on the subject, we hope, and he joins us tonight. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Tucker. Good to be with you.
So what do you make of the response to this?
Well, you know, at a certain level, I understand these idiotic tweets because the defining act of these school shootings is the absence of meaning. I mean, if you compare it with, say, that ISIS guy on the bike path in New York who mowed down a bunch of people because he wants to usher in a new caliphate worldwide, in a sense, when you're doing it for Allah, that's easier to understand than these completely empty purposeless events where a guy just kills a bunch of school kids for no reason at all. And in that vacuum, where we search for meaning, people pour their lamest, dreariest tropes. And so to blame it on the NRA is the default position of most celebrities and most Democrats, and that's what they do. But it's precisely because there is an absence of meaning in this event. It's precisely because a guy kills 17 people for no reason whatsoever. They did nothing to him. That suggests what you said at the top of the show, that the reasons for it are deeper, more complex, and it behooves us, in memory of the dead, to actually talk and think seriously about it.
I agree with that. It's a very deep observation, though, about the hollowness at the core of these things. What do you think, and I don't know, you don't want to speculate, no responsible person does, but you've watched years of this. What's your instinct about some of the causes of it?
Well, for example, I mean, I think it is much... You talked about social atomization at the top of the show, Tucker, and that's true. But the fact is that the combination of factors means you can be socially entirely dysfunctional and actually have what seems like a rich and rewarding fantasy life through technology now. You know, if you're in the late 19th century, if you were a miserable social loser, you were basically just on your own kicking a can around the backyard. There was nothing else to do. Now, like this guy, you can go on the internet, you can make threats that attract the attention of the FBI, apparently. You can lead a rewarding life communicating with some guy in Uzbekistan or Papua New Guinea, all over the world. And in some sense, that fantasy life is more real for people than actually, you know, going to the soda fountain and having a chocolate malt with friends or whatever they were doing 50, 60 or years ago. And that's very disturbing. The fact that the void is now rewarding and fulfilling, there is great peril in that, because it suggests we're going to have more of these kind of people in the years ahead.
The effects of technology, we have not paused long enough to consider what they are, but I suspect you're absolutely right. This is one of them. Mark Stein, thank you for that. Really interesting.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
President Trump is starting a shadow war with Russia in Syria. Surely that proves he's not Putin's puppet, or is that just what Putin wants us to think? That story next. Hey, Sean.
Hey, Tucker. Thank you. Great show as always. And welcome to Hannity. And this is a Fox News Alert. We have a lot of breaking news about the Florida high school shooter confessing to killing 17 people. And also breaking at this hour, new questions about how all of the warning signs surrounding the gunman, Nikolas Cruz, were missed, what went wrong, and why did so many red flags go unnoticed. We're going to have a comprehensive discussion tonight. Also tonight, in the face of unspeakable evil, violence, tragedy, people rose up to protect other people. We're going to show you the heroes that saved lives at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And while politicians, the media, they're all pointing fingers, placing game, giving you the same predictable talking points tonight, we will offer solutions. How do we protect students at schools all across the country? Answers. That is in tonight's Breaking News opening monologue. All right, we start tonight with breaking news and details about the investigation into this horrific, tragic Florida high school shooting. Now, the 19-year-old gunman, Nikolas Cruz, he has now confessed to slaughtering 17 innocent people and wounding at least a dozen others. Now, Cruz is also telling investigators details of the sinister attack. He shot students in the hallway. He fired into 5 separate classrooms. And Cruz also confessed to authorities that he had extra ammunition in his backpack. Now, we're also learning disturbing new details of missed warning signs in what is now one of the worst mass shootings in American history. All of the red flags were there, but tragically, Nikolas Cruz was able to commit this heinous act. Now, the FBI is in fact confirming tonight that in September, a YouTube user with the name Nikolas Cruz, spelled the name the same way as the shooter, was reported to the Bureau for writing, quote, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." Now, the man who reported the comment says that the FBI visited him the following day, but the Bureau is saying today that it could not be determined the time, the location, and actual identity of who posted the comment. Now, our own Catherine Herridge, as she noted earlier today, all the FBI would have had to do is trace the IP address, which is a routine practice, to determine the location of the individual. For some reason, it didn't happen in this case. Now, the mayor of Broward County is saying that Nikolas Cruz was being treated at a mental health clinic but stopped seeking treatment more than a year ago. And authorities are describing his social media posts as beyond disturbing. Just take a look at some of these pictures. You can see the suspect. He's seen posing with guns and knives and even dead animals. And former classmates of Cruz say he was a loner. He was obsessed with firearms. He liked to show off pictures of all of his weapons. Now, the Miami Herald is reporting that Cruz had been suspended for fighting and having ammunition in his backpack, and Cruz was then later expelled for disciplinary reasons and was attending a school in Broward County for at-risk students. Cruz also had problems at home. Both parents adopted him, and his brother are dead. His mother passed away in November. Now, the suspect was staying with a friend's family, and there were also reports of Nikolas Cruz having ties to a Florida-based white supremacist group. But law enforcement said earlier today that they haven't seen any of those connections. We'll continue to monitor. What's also very troubling tonight is how students are describing their former classmate. Now, this is what they say about the shooter, Nikolas Cruz. Let's watch.
He definitely had just something a little off about him. But it was just more or less that he was aggressive and quiet and shy about when he got aggressive.
Personality was very different.
He was a bit off. He would curse randomly in the middle of lunch. You know, he would just scream out random curse words, and he always just seemed a little bit off. You know, just something was wrong with him.
That it was a lot of crazy stuff that he did. Just not right for school. He got kicked out of school multiple times for this kind of stuff. Honestly, a lot of people were saying that it was going to be him, stuff like that. We threw a lot of kids threw jokes around like that, saying that he was the one to scoot up the school. But it turns out, everyone predicted it. That's crazy.
Now, just like with other mass shooters, there were signs, there were warnings of mental, social, emotional problems, but all the pieces were never put together to prevent this tragedy from happening. And like with many other shootings and terrorist attacks, Nikolas Cruz was telegraphing his intentions all over social media. Now, aside from the obvious fact that anyone that would commit these horrible acts of evil and violence are completely deranged, the one commonality between the gunman in Parkland, Florida, to Sutherland, Texas, to the church in South Carolina, Sandy Hook, Virginia Tech, are mental health issues and mental illness. Now, during an address to the nation earlier today, the president offered his deepest condolences, and he highlighted this issue of mental health. Let's take a look.
We comfort the grieving and the wounded. And we hurt for the entire community of Parkland, Florida, that is now in shock and pain and searching for answers. To law enforcement, first responders, and teachers who responded so bravely in the face of danger, we thank you for your courage. We are committed to working with state and local leaders to help secure our schools and tackle the difficult issue of mental health. Later this month, I will be meeting with the nation's governors and attorney generals, where making our schools and our children safer will be our top priority. It is not enough to simply take actions that make us feel like we are making a difference. We must actually make that difference.
Profound words from the president saying it's not enough to feel better, it's got to make a difference. Now, the president is planning to visit Parkland, Florida, and offer comfort and support to the community. Details have not yet been finalized. Also, predictably, within hours, Democrats, the liberal media, they race as they always do to politicize a tragedy and try to blame, believe it or not, President Trump and Republicans. Let's take a look.
Step up, be a man, and talk about it, and stop thinking about the NRA and your next campaign donation. Just stop. Everyone knows what you're doing, and it's time. That does it for us this morning. Stephanie Ruhle picks up the coverage right now.
Thanks so much, Mika. Thanks, Joe. And to Marco Rubio, you don't have to step up and be a man. Step up and be a human.
Words of consolation, talk about mental health, are simply not enough. They must be followed by real action. The president has to lead or get out of the way.
The people have got to say enough is enough. We're not continuing with all these massacres. And we've got to have the representatives of the people in the halls of government respond to that.
This has happened with Republican administrations, under Democratic administrations, but what you see there, it's shameful, it's disgusting, but it's not surprising because it's so predictable. It happens every single time there is a shooting. Hollywood celebrities, they were also quick to post their hateful messages, of course, aimed at the president. Republicans on Twitter. Let's start with Chelsea Handler tweeting, quote, "We have to elect candidates that are not funded by the NRA in November. We have an opportunity to elect candidates who won't allow kids to go to school and get shot. It's disgusting how many times this has happened, and Republicans do nothing. You all have blood on your hands." Bette Midler, another school shooting, this in Florida. Congrats to the spineless cowards who do nothing to help us stem this horrific epidemic in Congress. And Director Adam McKay posted, "Normal person, oh my God, kids are being killed in schools, churches, concerts. Let's do something. Republican congressman, kids are being killed in schools and churches and concerts. Let's not do one single thing. Hashtag blood on your hands at GOP and at NRA." Author Stephen King writes, Broward school shooting. There will be prayers from Blabbermouth Don, Pence, and the Grinch, and their right-wing cohorts. There will be no call for any sort of sane gun regulations. Now, that, sadly, is the left solution every single time this happens. They rush to judgment, they want to point fingers and blame, and use all kinds of vicious, horrific rhetoric. It never accomplishes anything. Now, they shouldn't be what these tragedies are about here. You have people rolling out the same old, tired talking points and political arguments. You know, liberals, they start blaming the weapon that the shooter used, in this case an AR-15. But if they want to ban AR-15s and these madmen, they will use something else. We saw that at Virginia Tech, where a gunman used a pistol and killed 32 people. Look, let's get to solutions tonight. I have been in radio for 30 years of my life. This is my 23rd year at the Fox News Channel. I know all of the talking points, and I know it's all just noise, and it's not going to solve the problem. Here's a simple truth. You're not going to change people's minds with a political debate, especially as it relates to the Second Amendment. I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. My mind's not going to be changed. I've thought this through all these years in my life, and I doubt I can change the minds of any of these Hollywood liberals and the anti-Second Amendment crowd. The problem this country is facing right now is school safety. Now, we can keep repeating the same talking points and talking over each other again and again and again after something like this happens, or maybe it's trying to actually find a solution to this problem. The children of this country deserve to be protected. They deserve safe schools. As the president said, no child, no teacher should ever be in danger in an American school. We can all agree on that. No parent should have to fear for their son or daughters when they kiss them goodbye in the morning. Now, I want to lay out a solution that I think is not political, and frankly, I believe any reasonable person can agree on. This is about the safety and security of students and children in our schools. And every single school in the country needs immediately a comprehensive threat assessment done by law enforcement professionals. Every school has a unique situation. And for those that will say, where are we going to get the money for this? Well, I would argue that it's probably more than likely local police, local FBI would be happy to help schools figure out the best plan of action to protect these kids and keep them safe. Now, you're going to have to secure the perimeter of every school. All points of entry must be secure. You got to make sure that there is a system that controls who is going in and out of the building. And in addition to that, you'll need a strong physical security presence. And you can start by hiring trained, armed, former or retired police officers, trained, armed, former, retired, armed military veterans. In other words, let's give our kids the same security that most politicians that they get. Let's give them the same protection that actors and actresses get on the red carpet when they're at the Oscars and pretty much everywhere else they go. We have plenty of retired officers, plenty of trained professionals, plenty of trained military guy. They can conceal their weapons, but their very presence also with a strategic plan that is properly implemented will bring about a profound change. I know there are probably detractors out there. They're going to say, but Sean, Parkland, Florida High School, they had an armed security guard. Okay, here's the thing. The school has 3,000 students. It's one of the biggest campuses in Florida. You're going to need more than one person to properly assess and deter any potential threat at a facility that large. We need enough people to protect every single building, every point of entry, and the entire perimeter. Now, some of you will argue, okay, this is going to cost money. You're right. My answer is yes. But is it not worth every penny so that we never, ever have to turn on our TVs like yesterday and see this unfold ever again like what happened in Parkland? Now, here's another point about the plan. Now, we already know it works. I broadcast from New York City, and post 9/11, you cannot enter a single office building without a work ID. I have a radio building I enter. I have a TV building I enter. And if you're a visitor in any of these buildings, you have to present a valid identification, or else you're not getting in, and you have to be vouched for by people that have been secured and already in the building or work in the building. Every student can have their own valid ID before entering the school, and also, where needed, metal detectors, which have already proven to be effective in some schools in the country. Here's the bottom line. We are at a crossroads. It's time to either step up, do our job, create school safety that will work for these kids. Give them the same safety our politicians, actors, actresses, and famous people get. And instead of bringing out the same old talking points and trying to score cheap political points and trying to outdo each other with the same arguments, same attacks, nobody's mind's being changed. Maybe for once we could solve the problem. And this should be all about solutions. Now, I'm not saying this plan is flawless. Nothing is ever going to stop 100% of these things from happening. There is evil in the hearts of other people, unfortunately, in this world. But why wouldn't we try to do every single thing we can do in this case to prevent these tragedies from occurring and make them less deadly if, in fact, they do happen? Here's a simple test and a question for everybody tonight I think they can ask themselves. If, God forbid, you ever found yourself in any type of administrative building and that building has an active shooter, would you prefer to know that there are trained, armed, retired military and police already on site to give you a fighting chance? Would you want to know that there was a complete threat assessment, security assessment on that building that was completed? My guess is you probably would. Now, here's our final point. Democrats, They say gun control leads to less violence. Well, if that's the case, I'd like them to explain why cities with the highest murder rates have the strictest gun control and are run by Democrats. Look at these stats about the number of murders in 2016. All of these cities have Democratic mayors and have been run by liberals for years. Yet their crackdowns on the Second Amendment, it has done nothing to stop violence. Liberals also don't want you to know about these shocking statistics. During the Obama presidency, over 3,900 murders in his home, adopted home, a town of Chicago, and more than 18,000 people who were shot in Chicago just during the last 6 years of his presidency. Now, did you remember hearing this kind of outrage and blame by the left about the out-of-control violence? That's one American city. And liberals also love to say that giving people the right to carry doesn't prevent crime. The figures say otherwise. Let's take a look at some of the charts given to us by author, More Guns, Less Crime, John Lott Jr. from the Crime Prevention Research Center. The chart shows violent crime before and after right to carry laws were enacted in the U.S. And as you can see, having more citizens armed leads to a decrease in violent crime. Here's another graphic on murder rates before and after right to carry laws were put into place. Also in the U.S., murders have plunged as a result. And as John Lott Jr. points out, as more people carry guns, you see further drops in both of those statistics. All right, a lot to absorb. The answer is we got to protect our kids. We don't need to tune into what we saw yesterday ever again. Let's start solving the problem. Here with reaction, the host of Justice with Judge Jeanine Pirro. Judge, any court, that you walk into in America, I have to go through a metal detector, anyone I've ever been in. I also have to present an ID in any court I've ever been to. Every time I've been to Congress, every RNC convention, every DNC convention, every ball game I go to, and every office building in New York. Can we not do something better instead of the same old arguments?
Well, Sean, you're so right, and what you said certainly rang true to me, where whenever something like this happens, we go to the old argument. The Second Amendment people say, the right of the individual to possess a bear arms shall not be infringed. And then on the left, they say that guns kill people. I think shooters kill people. But let me start by saying, Sean, number one, that as a DA, I would often have to tell a parent that their child was the victim of a homicide. So my heart goes out to all of those parents and all of those people who knew the victims here. But we need to be very clear. This is not a political issue. This is not an issue about the left and the right and the NRA. Actually, I'm sick of hearing the NRA. And in the interest of full disclosure, let me say I have many guns. I have long guns. I have handguns. But this is really about the individual. And in this case, an individual who not only threatened and posted himself on YouTube as someone who wanted to be a professional school shooter, but that individual had been expelled from school. He had all kinds of personal problems, and yet he was able to purchase a gun. Why was he able to purchase a gun? Because background checks, to be honest with you, are a joke in the sense that if you're on psychotropic drugs, if you've been in a mental institution, HIPAA law protects us, and I used to sign pistol permits all the time as a judge. It prevents us, the HIPAA laws, from finding out what your mental history is. So all the wackadoos from Adam Lanza and all the school shooters, Aurora, Columbine, they can get a gun with no problem, although some of them got them for their parents. But that's not the point. You are absolutely right. We need to protect kids, and that means we've got to have metal detectors. We've got to have experienced cops. I don't care if they're retired or they're still cops working in the schools. And we've got to be able to have perimeter controls. We've got to have teachers who can carry a weapon and react to this kind of nonsense, because our kids deserve our protection, Sean.
Look, I'm not saying it's good. I know schools that right now, if you're a parent, there's only one door you're getting in, that they do have security at these schools. There's only one door. And even if they know you, I've gone into schools where, hi, Mr. Hannity, I need your ID. First thing they would say. No exceptions.
Sean, you can do that at a building in New York City. They'll say, hi, Judge Jeanine, do you have your ID? Wait a minute. We're in New York City. You know who I am. But I agree with you, Sean. What we had here, though, was a warning that we haven't had in other cases. And with all due respect to the FBI, if they deserve it, based on everything we're hearing about, I don't want to hear another FBI agent go up to a microphone and say, we had no further identifying information. Wait a minute. You're the FBI. Some guy did the right thing, and he called you, and he said, this kid is on YouTube saying, I want to be a professional school shooter. How many people in this country have the name Nikolas Cruz? How many people in this country have the name Nicholas with a K? How many of them have bought a gun? If we learned anything from 9/11, it's that the federal agencies don't connect with each other. This kid, all the warnings were there. All they needed to do was connect the dots, and they didn't.
Now, I think, Judge, you couldn't say it any better. All right, we appreciate your insight, and we'll be watching you this weekend, and you're in for me tomorrow night, and people will be watching. Thanks, Judge. When we come back, President Trump, we have a lot of breaking news, vowing tough action on mental health following the shooting massacre in Florida. Ed Henry has details and so many more angles, and we'll introduce you to the heroes from yesterday. Straight ahead.
Teacher and said, I am scared, and then we all heard gunshots, and he unlocked the door and let us in. I had thought he was behind me.
This is Mr. Beagle?
But he wasn't.
What happened?
When he opened the door, he had to relock it so we can stay safe. I think I get the chance to.
A student describing how her geography teacher was killed yesterday, protecting her and her fellow classmates during the shooting. And that is not the only incredible act of heroism that we're hearing about tonight. Joining us now with a lot more is Fox News' Trace Gallagher. A lot of heroes here that have come up. Trace.
Yeah, a bunch, Sean. Most schools, including this one, have active shooter drills, giving students and teachers some guidelines on how to react. But experts say during a genuine attack, instinct takes over. And in this case, the instinct of 37-year-old assistant football coach and security guard Aaron Feis was to throw himself in front of students to shield them from the bullets. The coach was shot and later died in surgery. Those who knew him say he died the same way he lived, putting himself second. Watch.
I mean, he was a big man. He sprinted with everything he had towards it to make sure everybody was safe. And I heard that he got in front of a couple people and shielded them, and he actually took the bullets for them.
I don't know when Aaron's funeral is. I don't know how many adults are going to go, but you'll get 2,000 kids there. The kids in this community loved him. They adored him. He was one of the greatest people I knew.
And witnesses say that geography teacher you mentioned, Sean, Scott Beagle, knew that kids in the hallway were in danger, so he opened his classroom door to let them in. But when he tried to relock the door, the shooter walked by at that very moment, and he was shot and killed. Students inside his classroom say he got in the way of the killer and likely saved many lives. Several other teachers also barricaded their doors and hid their students. And then there was the story of the unnamed janitor, who witnesses say helped save the lives of students who were unknowingly running toward the shooter. They say the janitor told them to run the other way and ushered them into a classroom for safety. Listen.
He stopped us, and he got us into Chef Kurth with Chef Kurth's help into her classroom. I would say about 30 to 40 students into this teacher's classroom at the same time. And as a result of their heroic actions, they saved probably all of our lives, about 40 of us.
Yeah, amazing to think. Amazing to think that within seconds, many students witnessed both the epitome of evil and the height of heroism, and many other stories we have yet to hear about. Sean.
Amazing heroism. Thanks, Trace, for that report. We appreciate it. And earlier this morning, the president delivered a powerful address to the nation, and he says he plans to travel to Parkland, Florida in the coming days. Live from Pompano Beach in Florida with much more, Fox News Chief National Correspondent, our own Ed Henry. Ed.
Sean, good to see you. And you want to talk about heroes, I can tell you this time last night at this medical center that I'm standing in front of, there were fears that the death toll of 17 was going to rise. There were still people in critical condition, people here working around the clock to save lives, doctors, nurses, first responders. And I can tell you tonight there's a glimmer of hope. There's only one patient left in critical condition. They're still rallying around that patient. The president giving his thanks certainly today, grateful for everyone springing into action, but also trying to heal the nation as he spoke from the White House. Listen.
We are committed to working with state and local leaders to help secure our schools and tackle the difficult issue of mental health. Later this month, I will be meeting with the nation's governors and attorney generals, where making our schools and our children safer will be our top priority. It is not enough to simply take actions that make us feel like we are making a difference.
Now, remember, after that horrific shooting in Las Vegas, the president and First Lady Melania Trump didn't just talk to families of victims. They also went in, met with doctors at a medical center, the nurses, the first responders, to thank them. I'm told by the doctors here today that without the EMT technicians jumping on this quickly and stopping the bleeding, there would have been many, many more lost lives. And so the president will be here in South Florida at Mar-a-Lago this time tomorrow night. Sean, there's nothing on the official schedule just yet, but one official suggested to me that as early as Saturday morning, the president is likely to be either at this medical center, the high school, somewhere in this region, wanting to show more directly his thanks for everything that everyone on the ground here has done, Sean.
All right, Ed Henry, thanks so much for that report. We appreciate it. Joining us now with more, we have former LAPD detective, Fox News contributor Mark Fuhrman, former FBI special agent Manny Gomez. Mark, I've known you a lot over the years. We don't often disagree. You see a couple of flaws in what I think. You're never going to convince an anti-gun person to be pro-Second Amendment. And similarly, I've carried a weapon almost all my adult life. I've had carry permits in New York, California, Alabama, Georgia, and Rhode Island. I've had carry permit. It's part of, I was trained since I'm 11 in the use of a firearm. So you're not going to win on that debate. But securing the schools with the professionals, to me, is 1,000% doable. And we owe it to the kids to do this.
We do. We do, and the only thing that I don't disagree with you, I just think that there's a better approach. When you have retired personnel, they have the best part of their career behind them, and you need a generational gap that isn't 2 or 3 generations, perhaps just better part of one. These officers on the school need to be able to interact with these students and get that information that a guy like Cruz would have surfaced and they would have actually confided in the officer. You need to get some kind of a system where you have protocols for all these schools so everybody is working off the same sheet of music, and you need to harden the inside target so the suspect can't get in, and you create the tactical situation for a shooter on the outside, which allows responding officers and the security officers to take out the suspect with no danger to the students. I think this is all possible without gun control.
All of it is, and strategically and tactically, look, my guess, Manny, is you're going to have retired military, retired police, or maybe active. And I think you can even work in conjunction with local law enforcement to get this done. And again, it would be concealed carry. I would think probably a lot of people, a lot of the students would become friends with these guys over time. And Mark's right, we can get a lot of intelligence from them. But strategically, tactically, you surround the perimeter. You have a full threat assessment, security assessment. We know the entry point at any point. And all of this, everybody gets in is known. Nobody that is unknown gets into that school, period, end of sentence. It seems doable if we choose to do it.
I totally agree. Having the experience of former military, former law enforcement, we just had a wonderful piece where the coach from this high school saved lives. This is a coach that knew these students. He was a father figure, perhaps, certainly an adult figure to these young men and women. That's what we need. We need people that these young people will respect, look up to if they have problems, whether it's a active shooter situation or on a more day-to-day basis, a drug condition, a criminal condition, a bullying condition. They will go up to these former law enforcement, former military role models and be able to discuss with them what they could do to help the situation. So it'll be a win-win-win on a daily basis.
Everybody.
That's
Mark, you said
right.
something. If they're there every day, look, I was a kid smoking in the bathroom. I got to know the janitors, everybody, because they wouldn't rat me out for when I was young and stupid. But in all seriousness, they're going to get to know these kids. Those kids are going to open up to them. And all the things we've heard that the kids are now saying post the shooting, these guys will have heard earlier. And they have the training and the knowledge and how to intervene in a situation like that.
Agreed.
No, I agree, Sean. When you have somebody that's inside a system like a school, you have to not only have security, you have to be able to have investigative skills to be able to very effectively and sometimes under the radar investigate some of these problems that you see or that are reported to you. But just remember that all security, from the protection of the president to anything that the FBI does, the Israelis, anybody will tell you, security is a layered event. It's not just one. You have layers of security, so you always contemplate a failure of one or something that fails or something is taken out. You need a layer of security no matter what, and a school especially.
All right, thank you both. If every American demands this in their district, we will have safer schools, 1,000% safer. All right, when we come back, we'll have a heated debate. Dan Bongino, Geraldo Rivera, who is down in Florida, as we continue. Stay with us. All right, following yesterday's deadly shooting in Florida, Democrats, members of the media, so quick to politicize a tragedy. Take a look.
The pattern will be perfectly predictable. There will be a moment of silence. People will wish everybody thoughts and prayers and sympathy for the victims. And then the Congress of the United States will do absolutely nothing.
And that city you're in, Washington, if you match it against public opinion polls of their constituents, the lawmakers in that city are failing American people every day.
I just really don't know what the body count needs to be before people in Washington, D.C. give a rat's ass about the people in this country and their children.
This one is the 18th school shooting just this year, but also the day-by-day deaths that are preventable, and we have an obligation to prevent. Congress has been complicit. Congress bears responsibility.
All right, joining us now with reaction, Fox News correspondent at large, Geraldo Rivera, former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino. All right, Geraldo, last night we got a lot of reaction, and you're rightly, this has to end. I share your passion, and I know how sincere you are. Then you went into this AR-15 argument. I don't want to change this into a gun debate because I think we better transcend it quick. I will never convince you that on the issue of guns, and I own AR-15s. You're never going to convince me. So if we get rid of the AR-15, Virginia Tech was the worst shooting in history, and that was a pistol. So we'll get rid of the AR-15, we'll get rid of the pistol. What about securing the schools? What about the retired military, trained, armed, police, military guys, securing the perimeter? A real plan like we have for actresses and actors and politicians.
You know, brother, I totally endorse your campaign to harden our schools. I think that Detective Furman laid it out in very explicit terms with the layered defense and so forth, and I can't top that. I am 100% behind you in that, Sean. But I think that people have to get their arms around a harsh reality that in the state of Florida and many other states, a psycho, disturbed, expelled 18-year-old who's talking about being the next schoolyard shooter can legally purchase an AR-15 military-style assault weapon. This is a kid who can't buy a beer in this state. I think that it is outrageous and illogical, Sean. And listen, and we have to remember one thing. That AR-15 was banned. Sales of that weapon were banned in this country from 1994 until 2004.
And it didn't help.
Under the Brady ban.
Didn't help.
I mean, for 10 years, we didn't have it. It did help. I mean, let's do something. I mean, we can't have the kid who's fermenting all this evil inside him have such easy access. Not only does he get the machine.
All right, Dan.
Geraldo, listen, I appreciate your emotional involvement in this as well. It was a tragedy. But let's talk reality. The assault weapons ban, the Department of Justice's own study on the assault weapons ban, said it did almost nothing to reduce firearms violence. So what you're suggesting, to be clear here, is what? That legal, law-abiding American citizens like me, right? I own an AR. Frankly, Geraldo, I like you, I respect your opinion, but I don't care about your opinion about what weapons I should have. Why should I be stopped because you want to, wait, hold on, because you want to reinstitute a ban that the Department of Justice itself said had almost no effect on firearm violence.
Have you, Dan, wait a second. Have you heard, hold it, Dan. Have you heard from the children in this school? Have you heard from the children going up to the news teams and telling them how disappointed they are in the adults and that you have to do something? They have to or get off the pot. Yeah. I mean, stop with the thoughts and prayers. If I hear one more politician tell me about the dead 17 kids are in their thoughts and prayers, I don't care about their thoughts and prayers anymore.
Geraldo,
I care about what they're going to do to keep my child safe.
I've got kids. And you know what? Listen, you were a war correspondent at one point. I was a police officer. I've actually been shot at. And you know what? I had a firearm to defend myself. You know, and suggesting somehow that we are going to make these kids, some of whom are dead, safer by disarming and making them sheep in a school and by stopping legal law-abiding people from getting guns is not the solution. And it's entirely disingenuous to claim the moral high ground on that.
Hold on. I have been at Fox News for 17 years. I understand how my feelings on this are not in sync with the majority of my audience. I apologize for that. But you have to know how deeply I feel about this. When an 18-year-old who has been expelled from school, whether he's orphaned or he leaves his foster family or he's shooting in the backyard and he's telling other friends, you got to come see my guns, when that kid can go up to this gun seller here and legally purchase an AR-15 with 30-round clips, the standard clips, and buy a half a dozen of them and extra ammo. And this is the same kid, this is the same punk, psycho, loser kid who can't buy a Budweiser because he's underage. If everyone doesn't see how illogical that is, then I feel sorry for people. If you can't, if your embrace of the Second Amendment is so fervent and blind.
Remember, 32, the worst U.S. school shooting, 32, it was a pistol. But let me go back. I think I'm proving a point here. We're not going to convince either side in this debate. You're not going to convince Dan. You're not going to convince me. We're not going to convince you. I think the answer, and I'll throw it to Dan first, is to protect the schools. Full security markups of every school, secure perimeters, entry points only, and armed, retired military police. Dan.
Sean, it's the only way. You know, I was a cop. When I used to sit in the cells, sometimes I would talk to the criminals we arrested on gun crimes. America, are you listening to me? Criminals don't care. They don't give a damn about your gun laws. Matter of fact, they love your gun laws. You know why? They get to prey on a bunch of innocent sheep out there. I'm not disputing Geraldo's authenticity here or his genuine passion for this at all. I'm simply suggesting that the solution he presents is an irrational one that we both agree, Geraldo. This kid should have never been in possession of firearms. I'm simply saying your solution will not work. It is entirely irrational.
All right, real quick, we have 20 seconds.
I'm not going back to guns. I've got 5 kids. I've got a 12-year-old who's in middle school. I want her protected the way my money is protected in the bank. I want her protected the way we are when we go into airports. I want we always say, what's your most precious possession? My most precious possession are my children. We always say that. Let's put our money where our mouths are. I hope that the president, as he's coming down, and I know that he's coming here to Parkland, will also voice his concerns about this in a very deep and heartfelt way, in a sincere way. I agree. But I definitely think we've got to look.
Geraldo, at the end of the day, we all agree on that point. And you can't tell me that if we can secure the airport, secure our planes, secure the Oscars red carpet, and help and everybody else that wants security, that we can't do it for our kids. That's a must. Good to see you both. Appreciate it. If you're a parent, you definitely want to see this next segment. We're going to tell you the warning signs to look for, and others. If you see it happening, see something, say something. That actually happened this time, but what should you be looking for next? Like so many other horrific mass shootings, Nikolas Cruz displayed some pretty disturbing warning signs to his fellow classmates, his teachers, including some behavior so bad he was expelled from school. Joining us now, psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Bober is with us, and also radio talk show host Dr. Gina Loudon. Dr. Loudon, we got into this last night. All the signs were there. People, see something, say something. Okay, they said something. The FBI was brought in. The evidence was all over social media. The kids had an inkling that something was very wrong with this young man.
Yeah, Sean, I've been on the ground enough here that I've spoken with a lot of the students. I spoke with my own children who go to school not too far from here. And the thing that everybody is saying is, yes, they want something done, as Geraldo said in your last segment. But I think that we have to really think about what we can do, taking politics maybe off the table and really honing in on what is practical to prevent the next shooting. And I would submit to you that it doesn't have anything to do with the things we're talking about. It has to do with the military, like you're talking about, being available in the school, retired military, Sean, and maybe we can stick something like that in the infrastructure bill, take politics away.
Yeah. Dr. Bober.
Yeah, take politics out of it. Just let's do what we agree on, right? And let's find solutions for these students. And then let's deal with the guns and the mental health and all the other stuff on the table.
Doctor, let me go to you too, Bober, and I want to ask you this. I heard from everybody, all right, there's going to be a lot of grief counseling. But when you got a kid that you got to throw out of school because he's got ammunition in his backpack, it would seem in everybody's best interest, and I know some colleges offer this, and maybe they have more of the resources to be able to do it, but it seems that schools should be able to intervene in a way to offer the mental health as soon as you see these signs.
Sean, you know what? A lot of people talk about mental illness. They talk about guns. This was the perfect storm that came together. Only 4% of firearm homicides are committed by people with mental illness. Mental illness is really not a risk factor for violence. The people who are mentally ill are much less risky they tend to be more the victims than the perpetrators. And as far as guns, we know that most people with guns are not violent people. But if someone is hell-bent on doing destruction and hurting a lot of people, it's going to happen. So there's very little that we can do to prevent these types of instances.
Well, I disagree in this sense, and I'll throw this to Dr. Loudon, in the sense that we saw every sign and symptom, social media footprint, what the kids knew about him, getting expelled from school.
So maybe we take Maybe we take what we know about this particular instance and we look for that perfect storm and those signals, and we put that child in some sort of counseling. But I think that we have to consider that, Sean, 70% of Americans are diagnosable by the DSM-5 today with some sort of mental issue. Are we going to revoke the rights, the Second Amendment rights of all 70% of Americans? That would be a problem.
No,
and military, by the way, rates even higher. We
gotta pay attention to the symptoms. Thank you both. We appreciate your insight, you being back with us. We'll have more Hannity right after this. That's all the time we have left for being with us. The show will always be fair and balanced. We are not the Destroy Trump media. We also hope you'll set your DVR. You never miss an episode. Let not your heart be troubled. The news continues. The one and only Laura Ingraham is standing by. Miss Ingraham.
Sean, excellent show tonight. You're absolutely right.
Thanks.
The rush to judgment, the rush for the guns, it's reflexive, and we've seen it time and again. And if this was such a big priority, we would have had gun control passed by President Obama, but that wasn't a big priority for him.
No, well said. We can protect these kids, Laura. There is a way. We could secure anything we want. We just have to have the desire, and that's not political. Protecting kids.
As you pointed out, Hannity, the Israelis they deal with stuff. I mean, they had this problem. They dealt with it. Right. And you don't have any more school shootings in Israel. You just don't have it. So we got to learn from the people who actually do it right. Sean, thank you so much, as always.
All right. Have a great show. Thanks.
All right. I am Laura Ingraham. This is the Ingraham Angle. And as the nation mourns the heartbreaking Florida school shooting, Democrats go on the attack, immediately politicizing this tragedy. We're going to take a look at the fascinating theory that may be the real key to stopping these tragedies, one that demolishes every progressive cliche about gun control. Plus, Steve Scalise will share his unique perspective on what it's like to be in the gun sight of a mass shooter. And also, With four plans on the table, the Senate cannot agree on anything except defying the will of the American people on the issue of immigration. But first, the Florida shooting and the proper response. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Wednesday's mass killing in Florida was an act of pure evil by a young man who fits a certain profile. Of course, the almost instantaneous reaction from politicians, mostly on the left, is to demand swift action against guns.
Why does the United States of America have such a high rate of mass gun violence? The answer is very simply that, consistent with the Second Amendment, we can tighten the rules that apply to gun purchases.
It only happens here not because of coincidence, not because of bad luck, but as a consequence of our inaction. We are responsible.
I have said over and over, I'd rather pass gun safety legislation than win the election.
And the Oscar goes to, oh, Nancy, the drama. But seriously, as our security experts discussed last night, the focus on this or that type of gun or what caliber or how long it was, that misses the point. Nikolas Cruz was determined to kill one way or another. But that obvious fact seemed to elude today's media echo chamber.
More people will die in America by guns this year and next than died in a decade in Vietnam. And yet, Congress does nothing. The president does nothing.
Why so many mass shootings? Is it contagion? Is it the culture? Does it have something to do with the lack of respect for life around us, or frustration, or mental health?
You can't deal with this issue without dealing the availability of guns. You just can't. Sorry. It's a fundamental aspect of every one of these.
Look, I think Mike Barnicle makes a decent point there. The culture of life, are we supporting it? That's a good point. But the rush to the guns. Cruz passed a background check. He had no prior criminal convictions. So most of the media's high horse puffery makes no sense at all. It is not the gun that walked up to the school with an intention to carry out a Valentine's Day massacre. It was Cruz, a man with a warped mind, maybe some underlying condition we still don't know about, but he was set on revenge or on fame, or maybe a combination of the two. And in a way, this focus on the weapon in these cases, it absolves us from doing the real soul-searching necessary. It's difficult to do that. And from seeking answers that are real. So we actually might stop this from happening again. We have a Second Amendment in this country. The Supreme Court reiterated our personal right. It's an individual right. The God-given right to keep and bear arms. We have 300 million guns privately owned in the United States. 40% of Floridians own a gun. So let's be honest here. Okay, onerous gun control laws or all-out confiscation is not an option. It's not going to happen. And if it was, President Obama would have made this a focus, as I said to Hannity earlier. And those 2 terms he was in office, that would be as important as, you know, Obamacare or any of these other priorities. It wasn't. Why? And look, with people with real mental health problems, in many cases they are barred from purchasing a weapon. And maybe we can do more there. That debate is a good one to have. But let's not also forget, they still have to be identified. They still have to be properly diagnosed. Somebody has to usually do an intervention, a family member, a close friend. That creates a host of other challenges. And limiting access to guns or magazines, that's not going to stop another school shooting. Chicago has some of the tightest gun restrictions in the USA. Yet there were more than 4,000 shooting victims in Chicago in 2016. And gun deaths there rose by 61% between 2015 and 2016. 2017 numbers aren't all that much better, but those are still coming in. Outlawed or not, criminals will find a weapon. The gun debate that we have after these events misses the point. We have to start looking at the shooters themselves and what contributes to their acting out in these horrible ways. Common sense and a little human concern may have stopped this shooting from happening in Florida. May. Nikolas Cruz is described by classmates as a loner, as a freak, as an outcast, and as a troubled kid. Both of his adoptive parents were dead. Mother died on November 1st. He apparently had trouble with a girlfriend. You know, that's not a big deal, but hey, one thing we know, he was isolated and ridiculed. Even at the school, it's a very tolerant, open school, he was separated, segregated, and the school eventually expelled him. As a society, and on social media, we shun, we degrade, and we ignore people with abandon. This is particularly true of the young. And while, of course, nothing can explain away this evil, it's just evil, got to call it that we saw unfold yesterday. Perhaps, if we become more familiar with these warning signs, teach these warning signs, we could actually end up saving lives. What are the common traits of these mass shooters? Well, here are some of them. American Psychological Association has a long list. They are isolated. They are prone to violence, sometimes from the home front. They oftentimes abuse animals as young children. They're members of broken and at times, yes, violent families. Oftentimes, they seek solace by steeping themselves in social media. That's their only home. That's where they can be the big shot. And when a person poses with guns and knives and declares his intention to be a professional shooter, and the FBI is notified of this, I'm sorry, but somebody should have stepped forward. Someone should have intervened. The FBI could not have had a more obvious sign that Cruz was going to kill because he announced it on YouTube.
In 2017, the FBI received information about a comment made on a YouTube channel. The comment simply said, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." No other information was included with that comment, which would indicate a time, location, or the true identity of the person who made the comment. The FBI conducted database reviews, checks, but was unable to further identify the person who actually made the comment.
I'm sorry. I mean, I love the FBI. I mean, the FBI can surveil American citizens, right, as we saw with what happened with Carter Page. But with all its power and authority, they can't identify the person who posted the comment? I mean, did the FBI contact YouTube? And if not, why not? They should have gotten Cruz's address, visited him, questioned him, found out where he previously attended school, and notified the school of Cruz's disturbing comments. I know they're busy. I know they have a lot to do. But when someone is online saying, I am going to be a professional school shooter, with everything this nation has gone through, I think it requires more than a visit to the guy who reported him, or 2 visits. Again, this is just common sense stuff. And if the tech companies have to be part of the solution here, too. It's not about the privacy of Nikolas Cruz that matters here. None of this was done, however. We need to know more about how this process broke down. And perhaps this would have made the difference. But, of course, we'll never know for sure. In his comments today at the White House, the president struck the proper note. He spoke to the other kids who perhaps feel the way this shooter did.
I want you to know that you are never alone and you never will be. If you need help, turn to a teacher, a family member, a local police officer, or a faith leader. We must also work together to create a culture in our country that embraces the dignity of life, that creates deep and meaningful human connections, and that turns classmates and colleagues into friends and neighbors.
I thought that moment was one of the president's best moments of the past year. I mean, I really believe that. That's exactly what we need to hear. By the way, you got a lot of trash from people like Jennifer Rubin saying, oh, he'll never be the consoler-in-chief. Get out of here. It was a terrific statement. And aside, by the way, from the mystery of evil, what it is, where it comes from, that none of us can fully comprehend, this tragedy reminds us that human connectivity, what the president was talking about, their real relationships, I'm not talking about social media friends, people you've never met before. This is critical. This is the sinew that holds us all together. You think about the media, TV, film, video games, billboards, music lyrics. Not saying that caused this, but it does tend to desensitize all of us, and especially young people, to violence. And even the preciousness of every human life, the dignity of every human life, the absence of strong family bonds, and love. This can't be ignored as we look at how these things unfold. I worry that in this rush to find quick answers for this awful, senseless, evil tragedy, we race for the gun, and we forget the human component, the human being that pulled that trigger. When my 3 children and I prayed tonight, we do it together every night, but we prayed tonight before I came to the studio. We prayed for Florida, for the safety of all Americans, and for us to love each other more. It's a prayer we should all share. And that's the angle. Joining us now with reaction is Bobby Chacon, a retired FBI special agent. Bobby, I appreciate your joining us tonight. Obviously, I had some tough words for the FBI, and everything in hindsight is 20/20. Well, they should have done this, should have done that. But when you have someone posting on YouTube that they are going to be a professional school shooter, to me, that's one of those red flags that can't just be, you know, swept away with a couple of visits to the guy who reported on him. What could have happened here differently?
Well, we've got to ask those questions, and the FBI is going to have to answer them. And so, by all indications, they did rush right over and see him the next morning when he reported this. And so there was some urgency to it. Now, where they got lost in the process, where they were not able to find him, whether it was a subpoena to YouTube that went in and answered, or hopefully it was actually served on YouTube. What information was available at YouTube? Did he use different information that they couldn't find? I don't know. I don't know the answers. I'm sure the FBI is doing some soul searching and looking at this and reviewing it. Hopefully, lessons learned. This is, you know, the nightmare of every law enforcement officer or investigator, right, when you think you could have found something and it didn't. You know, but this is one piece. There was a mountain of evidence sitting over in Broward County. The school knew it. His teachers knew it. His classmates knew it. When I saw one of his classmates say, "I heard the school was shut up," and then when I heard who did it, I wasn't surprised. Well, that means that people knew in that area that this potential existed. Now, whether we need to give the schools more tools like the Baker Act or an expanded version of the Baker Act in Florida where they can take somebody like that off the street, put them into a psychiatric facility for 72 hours for an evaluation, I don't know. But that's where a conversation needs to take place. People knew. The FBI was working one small angle of this, but there were many videos online that his friends or classmates knew about. And if the classmates knew about it, the teachers know about it. My niece is a school teacher in Florida. I had a long conversation with her tonight about this. And teachers know everything the students know. It gets fed up to them. They knew, the administrators knew, to shuffle this kid off and expel him from the school. I think he's going to be... He's going to be somebody else's problem.
He's someone else's problem. And look, the school is dealing with a lot of kids from broken homes. You know, my sister-in-law just retired. She taught for 35 years. The stories she told about what's happened, especially over time, with the level of domestic violence, it's scary. I mean, so they intervening, and then there's a privacy concern, and then the school gets in trouble. Then they get sued. The lawyers rush in. So I think that's part of it. Just going back to the FBI for a moment, because you're right, there are all sorts of red flags. But the FBI is the trained professional organization who's supposed to be able to see, you know, see ahead, see 3 steps ahead on this. So my question is, his name did show up as Nikolas Cruz on the YouTube posting. We see it there.
Right.
Only 6 people in Florida spell their name as, I guess he did on that posting, very similar to that posting, 6 people with the K. Quick visits to those individuals could probably quickly tell the FBI whether that individual was going to be a problem. And it maybe at least scare the individual. I mean, again, it might not have even changed anything, but finding out where that individual went to schools, you know.
But you said 6 individuals in Florida. Those agents in Mississippi, they wouldn't have even known to look in Florida.
I think there were 12 nationwide. Yeah, 12 or 13 nationwide, 6 in Florida.
I mean, the first thing you do is you run them through wants and warrants. Is he convicted of a crime? Is he wanted for a crime? You know, you do those things, and then you start branching out. Social media didn't exist mainly when I was doing my main investigations. Now, social media is a huge part of investigation. So, you have to be conversant in searching on social media and doing those types of things in an investigation. And I assume they did that. Like you, I'm waiting for the answers to see what lessons can be learned.
The subpoena question, yeah, Bobby, the subpoena question is an interesting one, and I think this is where, again, when I lay blame, hindsight's 20/20, as I said. But when someone says, I'm going to be a professional school shooter, to me, you got to bust down all the doors to figure out who that person is, just because of everything this country has been through. And YouTube, all the tech companies have to help out. If we can hit like a home plate at Yankee Stadium with a cruise missile from like 7,000 miles away, we could find out who this person was. That's my sense.
Absolutely, and we're not afraid of those tough questions. They just make us better. They help us learn and get better. And so, the FBI is not afraid to face those tough questions. And in this case, hopefully we will, and we'll get those answers, and we'll learn from it.
Bobby, thank you so much. Great insights, as always. There's another aspect of this story we're going to get to tonight. Earlier today, a Time magazine headline blared the following: accused Parkland shooter Nikolas Cruz was a member of a white supremacist group. PBS, Uproxx, many others, big news organizations ran stories claiming that this was confirmed by the leader of this white nationalist group. Except now, police are saying there are no apparent ties between a white nationalist militia and the shooters. By the way, this group has 10 members and is run by a complete nutbag who rides around on a bike with a, he's a total whack job. Joining us now to discuss this, another rush to judgment, is Fox News contributor Raymond Arroyo. Raymond, this is wild, but I saw this pop up on my phone. I'm like, my detector, my blank detector went out.
And the media always gets ahead of its skis on these things because they want to get there first. They want to get the story.
Not just that. They want him to fit a certain profile.
They want to assign a political motive, and we've seen this again and again. Now, today what happened is this white supremacist guy, this Jordan Jarab, who's head of this odd militia group with like a handful of people in the woods, he claimed that this kid, Nikolas Cruz, trained with him in Tallahassee. Turns out he was wrong, but he told the Anti-Defamation League and the AP this story, and it spread like wildfire. But later, even the Southern Poverty Law Center and others said, no, this didn't happen. We can't confirm this. Now the Leon County Police Department says there doesn't seem to be a connection.
Why would you why would you rely on this freak from this white nationalist group as your only source of information?
Because it's a hot headline.
Ding, 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 ding.
It's a hot headline with a political edge. We've seen this before.
Tell me about what happened with Gabby Giffords. What happened with that?
Gabby Giffords in 2011, you'll remember, they were blaming Sarah Palin's year-old website that had crosshairs on certain districts. And they said, well, look, there's a crosshair on Gabby Giffords' Arizona district. This must be the reason the shooter got involved. Turned out to be a complete
The Pima County Sheriff said Jared Loeffner, the guy was named Clarence Dupnick. He said that he targeted the Tea Party in his comments, and he said that the Tea Party creates this atmosphere. That's Jared Loeffner. Created this atmosphere where people are triggered. This is Gifford Shooter that triggered this guy. Like the Tea Party is to blame. It was reprehensible. He even said he listened to talk radio at some point.
And Bloomberg, you remember with the Times Square bomber in 2010, he said the guy may have set off this bomb because he was upset with the health care plan, President Obama's health care plan.
Thank you, Mayor Bloomberg.
We've got to be very careful of these political motives. It's a rush, and we undercut real investigative reporting and law enforcement's discoveries, and also we miss the human dimension, what really might be motivating these kids to enact horrible violence on their peers and discovering the next kid. That is an important part of this story. You hit it in the angle. I think it's right on.
The rush to politicize always seems to go in one direction. Meanwhile, we're going to talk to Steve Scalise coming up in just a moment.
My congressman.
Yeah, we love Steve Scalise. A Bernie Sanders supporter shot him, but that kind of got swept under the real fast. They don't hear about that anymore.
Yeah.
That was a Bernie Sanders supporter.
Very interesting how they deep-sixed that. But look, this is evolving. It's a fast-moving story, but it's
we'll learn more.
Get it right.
We'll learn more. Raymond Arroyo, thank you. And most of us, by the way, can only imagine the horror of surviving a mass shooting. My next guest, as I said, Scalise, he lived it. Steve Scalise will be here. Unique insight on this Florida shooting up next. Thankfully, few know what it's like to be targeted and shot by a maniac attempting to mass murder. And our next guest survived that harrowing ordeal, but endured grueling recovery after being critically wounded. Congressman Steve Scalise joins us with his unique perspective on the Florida school shooting. Immigration, we got a lot to cover. Get over here. Good to see you.
So great to be on your show. Congratulations on getting that.
Absolutely. I can't believe we missed you at Mardi Gras.
I know. Roden Bacchus, and you were out there on the streets. I would have pummeled you with all kind of beads.
You hit me with the medallion right here. It's still bruised. I can't even touch my nose. Let's talk about what these kids are going through, what the school is going through, the rush for gun control, your colleagues pushing that. Blumenthal, Pelosi, Chris Murphy from my home state of Connecticut instantly goes to the floor of the Senate and says this is disgusting, basically pointing the finger at NRA politicians.
It's disgraceful anytime there's any kind of tragedy. I mean, a shooting, a bombing, whatever. Immediately you've got a group of legislators that go run out and start calling for gun control to take away the rights of law-abiding citizens. And they don't even know the fact of that particular event. And again, look at their bills, read their bills. They have nothing to do with these kind of shootings. What I first think we need to do is pray for the people that died, and there were unfortunately way too many people who died, but the families too. And all of these kids, Laura, there were a lot of kids that witnessed this that are going to have this with them the rest of their lives. The prayers helped me tremendously. And unfortunately, there's some on the left that actually mock praying for people. They say, oh, do gun control, don't pray for people.
That's so trite.
I needed those prayers. Those prayers helped me and my family at a really difficult time, and you could feel them. These families need prayer. They need counseling. They need help. But look, let's go find out the root of these problems. And we're already seeing there were so many things that slipped through the cracks. The telltale signs were there. I mean, when every kid in the school says, geez, I mean, this kid was the one that we knew would be a shooter.
Yeah.
Why didn't anybody else know about that? I mean, these are the problems we need to go address.
Bill Clinton today tweeted about the assault weapons ban. He said, look, in my 10 years, I guess 10 years or so, the assault weapon ban was in place, 94 to 2004. He couldn't have gotten that particular weapon. What do you respond to?
You know, you go find your law that was going to prevent this or the next shooting. And first of all, whatever criminal did these actions violated a whole host of other laws, too. So if you think there's some magic unicorn law that's going to stop it from happening, just keep in mind he violated probably dozens of laws already, including murdering people. It's against the law. So, you know, this idea that one magic law is going to stop the next one from happening, it's not. What you do see in common, number one, you see a lot of mental illness in common, but you also see gun-free zones. Shooters know that if you go to a gun-free zone, you're the only one with a gun and nobody else has. Fortunately, with me, I had 2 law enforcement agents that were with me that had guns that could counter the shooter. And ultimately, that's what took him down. It was other people with guns that took down the shooter. Every day in America, there are people that use guns to stop crimes, to defend their own families. That's what our founding fathers wrote about, by the way. They believed in an innate right of people to have guns for self-defense. And these people that want to take away your rights, guised under all of these tragedies, go pray for the families. Care about these families. Don't try to promote your agenda in the middle of a tragedy.
How are you doing in the aftermath of those? Now that you've gotten through all these surgeries, you still have to use those crutches to walk. You kept such an unbelievable attitude. I know there were so many dark days, but you kept. It was inspiring. Well, I mean, it was inspiring to so many of us. I mean, we were talking about it earlier. But do you have any PTSD from what happened to you? Do you have flashbacks to that day?
I really don't. And I mean, look, I've talked through this with my security detail, with my colleagues that were out there on the field. Yeah. I mean, look, this guy intended, and if there weren't other people with guns to stop the shooter, there would have been 15 members of Congress executed that day. And there weren't, luckily, by the grace of God, first of all. I mean, there were true miracles that happened on that field. I saw them. I experienced some of those. And so I don't focus on the negative. I saw so much good in people. I saw millions of people praying for me that I never met before.
Yeah, I was one of them.
It was thank you for the prayer.
We had great prayer chains.
It mattered.
Yeah.
My own community, obviously, family, friends, that mattered so much. But then just the kindness of strangers, and I saw it in so many different ways. I mean, Bono did a U2 concert. I'm a big U2 fan. He prayed for me before his concert at the beginning of a concert.
He's a big gun control guy too, but that's all right.
He prayed, and it really did matter. So I mean, the power of prayer is real. And look, I got to see so much of the goodness in people, and I'm still working through. Going to physical therapy 3 days a week.
Are you in pain constantly?
I don't have constant pain. I have some issues I'm still working through. Yeah. And obviously, the nerve damage, especially on my left side where the bullet entered. I'm, trying to learn how to walk again without crutches. And look, I want to go compete for my job again at second base. I was a starting second baseman.
I was going to say, I played college softball. We're getting you out there. We're going to play.
hard pitch,
no doubt about it.
80-mile-an-hour fastball in a major league ballpark. I want to get back out there again.
Come on. No bullets going to stop you from going out there.
I'm blessed. I'm blessed by God to be able to spend time with my family, to be able to get back to work again, doing some really neat things here.
And let's talk about immigration, because the president had 4 pillars. They seem to be represented in the Goodlatte bill and the House of Representatives, which I've supported from the beginning. 800,000 got amnesty, not 1.8. But this thing went down in flames in the Senate today. I mean, a lot of Republicans voted against the president's idea of how to move forward, which I found to be stunning.
Well, and this is why you take votes. You need to see where people are. And look, getting 60 votes in the Senate is going to be hard for anything. Getting 218 in the House is going to be hard. I'm a co-sponsor of the Goodlatte-McCall bill. This bill really does solve the problem. And by the way, we're working with President Trump and his whole team. You want to talk about border security, building the wall, ending chain migration, ending this crazy lottery. You pick names out of a hat.
Democrats don't want to end chain migration. They want to explode immigration to replace the electorate.
And we solve the DACA program, not with a amnesty path. You get in the back of the line. You be like everybody else if you want to come to this country. This is a great country that people still want to come to because of the American dream. Let's make it about merit. Let's get back to rule of law.
Do you think the Democrats want to give Trump a victory on immigration, really?
I think right now they're more concerned about politics. But look, there's a growing number of people that want to solve this problem. This Goodlatte-McCall bill solves the real problem. If somebody's got a better idea, bring it. But that's a bill that deserves merit. I hope we pass it.
Congressman, so great to see you. I'm gonna see you in Mardi Gras next year. Next year, now that I'm hooked.
You're gonna ride on the float.
Oh, come on!
It's so much fun.
I'll visit in a mask.
And
I'll
then
pretend
you eat
I'm
all
one of
that great food in New Orleans.
Oh, come on! Great to see you, and you look great. And I'm playing softball with you.
Great to be with you.
All right. Well, Democrats, Congressman, are howling, as we said, for more gun control laws to keep kids safe. But a top crime researcher, most respected, I think, in the whole country, said they have it exactly backwards. More guns, less crime. He wrote the book. We'll talk to him. Democrats, maybe a few Republicans, began calling for more gun control even before the basic facts of the Florida shooting were known. There were still bodies inside. But my next guest says more guns, not fewer, are actually key to ending school shootings. John Lott is the author of More Guns, Less Crime. Also joining us is Igor Volsky. He's the vice president at the Center for American Progress. Professor Lott, let's start with you. When people hear more guns, less crime, it's like, whoa, what does that mean? That sounds like totally wild, and that can't possibly be true. Florida is a state where 40% of the people there own a gun. Guns are readily accessible if you pass a background check. 18 years old and get a long gun, 21 and get a handgun. So they got a lot of guns, and you still had a big shooting there. What's up?
Well, people have a lot of guns, but it matters whether you can have it with you or not. And you look at all the big mass public shootings that they've had in Florida, and each one keeps on occurring in those tiny areas within the state where people aren't allowed to be able to go and defend themselves. These criminals may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid. They try to go to places where they know people can't defend themselves because they want to kill as many people as possible. And they know the longer it takes for somebody to arrive on the scene with the gun, the more damage they can do.
Are we sure that any of the security guards, a young woman today who was at the school, a student, said there were 5 security guards at the school, usually at each entrance, exit point of the school, including a police officer. I would assume the police officer, we haven't gotten to all these facts yet, though. I assume a police officer would have had a gun at the school or no?
Right. Well,
and that's one person at a school of 3,000 people.
Right. There apparently was one police officer who had a gun, but he never, for some reason, we still don't know why, was around when the attack was occurring. You know, the thing is, though, police, a uniformed officer, has an amazingly difficult job in stopping these types of attacks because if they're present, it's like kind of wearing a neon sign saying, shoot me first. They're the
ones. So you want people who are teachers?
People who don't stand out and they don't know who has a gun to take out first.
Igor.
Well, look, the problem is, as you point out, there are just too many guns. And the fact that this guy was able to obtain an assault weapon and was able to kill 17 people despite the presence of a police officer there really kind of explodes this whole argument that if you have more guns, you're safer. You line up the states that have the least gun regulations, they have the most gun crime. If we're gonna be serious about this problem in America, these school shootings, everyday gun violence in America, we have to move towards a country with fewer guns. It's just that simple. It's what the rest of the world has done.
Right. Well, that's obviously not going to happen. I mean, I like to deal in the world of reality.
Big goals for our community, for our safety. Americans are waking up. Actually,
okay, so your goal or your thought is if we have mass confiscation of weapons, where the government will go into the homes of those people have 300 million guns. They're going to go, but these are the same people who say you can't deport 20 million illegals, but you can go into the homes of people who have 300 million guns and take their guns. I like to see those hillbillies take their guns away. I don't think it's going to happen.
You know what? Not just my thought. You look at public opinion polling, you see overwhelming majority background checks, assault weapons bans, but also licensing for firearms. Hey, if you need a license to drive a car, you should have a license.
But you don't want that. You want confiscation. That's not going to stop a bad guy from doing something, though. Licensing, registration. He went through background check. He didn't have a conviction. He wasn't a judge mentally defective. He had none of that.
He should not have had access to that kind of weapon. That's what I'm saying.
But with what indicator would have stopped him?
Those weapons should be banned. Those assault weapons need to be banned. And most Americans agree with me.
Okay, so he's right. I think depending on what polls you show, Igor's right. The people who say, why do we need these guns, long guns, even though there are a lot of AR-15s in the United States. AR-15 type weapons are very accurate, actually very accurate and very good for self-defense.
Why do you need
home
those
defense.
kinds of weapons?
Well, why do you need any weapon? I guess you could say the same thing.
No, it's an assault weapon.
You don't want to ban things just on the way they look. You want to ban them, or at least talk about whether you want to ban them based on how they function. These are inside guts are essentially identical to semi-automatic hunting rifles. But just a point on the polls. You know, there are all these polls, but you look at when Bloomberg has put up these background checks initiatives that you claim that there's 90% support for, he lost in Maine. He outspent the other side 6-1. He won by 1 percentage point in Nevada, despite outspending the other side 8-1.
I don't want to talk about Bloomberg. All I can tell,
but that's you're bringing up the polls.
States that have expanded background checks, like Connecticut,
have seen crime go up.
That's just not true.
No,
have seen fewer gun deaths.
Look, Wyoming has Wyoming, North Dakota has the highest gun violence. I mean, they have you can get a gun really easily in those, but
though crime rates are high,
crime rates are high in Wyoming.
Gun deaths in those states are high.
It includes suicides and Western
you don't
states.
think suicide is a death we should prevent?
If you're talking about Western states, which have high male populations relative to females for older ages, you have suicides. But if you look at the states,
suicides are a problem.
Okay, guys, we're almost out of time, so wrap it.
If you look at the states, when they adopt stricter gun control laws, crime rates go up. When they adopt,
that's not true.
It is.
Sorry, John, that's just not true.
Overwhelming evidence. People can go to our website.
It's just not true.
You go to my website, I have a whole list of academic papers. The overwhelming number of academic papers find
we know Chicago has really tough gun laws and they have a disaster. We know Baltimore has horrible crime and has some of the most difficult, toughest gun laws in the country. Maryland and Chicago. So, I mean, look, I think we can look at these polls and you make some points, Igor, which I think are right. People hear assault weapon, they go, oh my God, we got to ban it. Question is, what it
is.
They think it's an automatic weapon. It's not. But great conversation.
Automatic weapons are banned.
They are.
You don't have crime with automatic weapons because they're banned.
Right.
Gun bans, gun restrictions
France bans
work.
them and look at the mass public shootings.
When's the last time you heard someone use a machine gun?
All right, guys, we got to roll. We're going to go black here otherwise. In other news, the public may want tougher immigration laws, but senators have their own ideas. So up next, we're going to examine why it's so difficult to get Washington to listen to the voters. Today, 4 separate immigration plans were blocked by the Senate. That despite recent polling showing most Americans want less immigration and more border security. Let's discuss where we go from here with Mark Krikorian from the Center for Immigration Studies, along with defense attorney Carney Shagarian, on that pronunciation. Let's talk about where we are, gentlemen. Krikorian, let's start with you. Now we have Republicans today voting against giving amnesty to 1.8 million Dreamers, but also in some of this legislation, especially the one that Trump supported, voted against helping DHS law enforcement, voted against cracking down on sanctuary cities, voted against the chain migration limitation. So why are all these Republicans taking the hightailing it out of here, including actually Marco Rubio, who voted against one of these bills, or all of these bills, I guess?
Well, my guess is that the Republicans who voted against the president's plan, which was the one that Senator Grassley had put together, along with the Democrats, had the same impulse, is that they thought that keeping high levels of chain migration in the future was more important than preserving the work permits of the Dreamers, of the DACAs. In other words, they basically threw the DACAs under the bus to keep chain migration going in the future. And I mean, that's a choice you can make, I guess, but it's not a choice I would have made.
Carney, let's go to you on this. That's a provocative statement by Krikorian, but I think he's right. The Democrats had the chance to give almost 2 million Dreamers, DACA people, amnesty, a pathway to citizenship. It would have taken 12 years, but it's better than being sent back home. And yet they went for maintaining these high levels of extended family chain migration. That's what they decided to bank on, which I think tells us a lot about what the Democrats really care about the Dreamers.
Laura, let me just point out up front, I'm not a defense attorney, I'm a civil rights attorney. But yes, the political back and forth, my heart goes out to those Dreamers and those people who have been living in this country, doing the best that they can, and for the last 6 months, they've been under threat of being deported day by day, and that emotional threat that they've been living with, Democrats haven't reached out to, and neither has the Republicans. The commentary from our president...
Whoa. Carney, how have the Republicans not reached out? I mean, I'm not someone who even loved this plan, by the way. I'm not like, whoa, this plan was great. But the president made a decision to compromise, to go above and beyond the 800,000 DACA kids to include 1.8 million people, which was upping it by 1 million. So the president didn't wait for Nancy Pelosi to say 1.8 million or Chuck Schumer. He did it by himself. And he said, OK, but you got to give us something on the other side here on the chain migration. The Democrats wanted to flood the country with more low-skilled labor so they could keep their electorate replenished. And the Republicans, like the Chamber of Commerce types, they want to keep these people coming into the country. I think it's about low wages, keeping them down. And who gets hurt in the end? I think the border enforcement people get hurt and the Dreamers get hurt.
The Dreamers do get hurt, and with all the contingencies that the president has put on this proposed legislation, as well as the Democrats being a little wily in their response, it has not helped the Dreamers one bit. And so here we are now 6 months later after President Trump issued his proclamation that he's not going to continue on with this Dreamer program, and these people live under a threat.
Well, there's a judge who now says it's the Fourth Circuit judge, which we're going to talk about tomorrow night. He's basically said, oh, no, you can't even get rid of the DACA. Really quick, we got like 15 seconds. Wrap it up, Mark.
The issue here is, do you want to amnesty the people who've lived here since they were kids and limit the fallout? That's what that chain migration and the border stuff is for, so we don't have to do this again 5 or 10 years from now.
Unfortunately, they punted, and we know why. And we were ahead of the curve on that. So were you, Mark. I appreciate it, guys. A rich, spoiled pro athlete talks smack about Trump. He'll get smacked back when we come back. All right, we're going to create a new banner. This is a Jum Doc alert. NBA superstar LeBron James is talking politics again, and this time it's R-rated. Here's his barely intelligible, not to mention ungrammatical take on President Trump in a new ESPN podcast.
The #1 job in America, the point of person, is someone who doesn't understand the people and really don't give a about the people.
But wait, there's more gripping insight. ESPN host Carrie Champion asked James and fellow NBA star Kevin Durant about what she described as Trump's racist comments.
I feel like our team as a country is not ran by a great coach.
It's not even a surprise when he says something. It's not even a surprise. It's like laughable. It's like
it's laughable.
It's laughable and it's scary.
But it's also scary because I shouldn't be numb to your racist comments.
Right.
I shouldn't be numb to your behavior.
I'm numb to this commentary. Like, must they run their mouths like that? Unfortunately, a lot of kids and some adults take these ignorant comments seriously. Look, there might be a cautionary lesson in LeBron for kids. This is what happens when you attempt to leave high school a year early to join the NBA. And it's always unwise to seek political advice from someone who gets paid $100 million a year to bounce a ball. Oh, and LeBron and Kevin, you're great players, but no one voted for you. Millions elected Trump to be their coach. So keep the political commentary to yourself, or as someone once said, shut up and dribble. We'll be right back. I mean, I should go go for a ran tomorrow morning before my radio show. Oh, my goodness. Shannon Bream is up next. Make sure to tweet us, Facebook us, if you have comments about tonight's show. But Shannon and the Fox News at Night team is going to do a fabulous show. Up next, I'll be watching. Miss Shannon.
Thank you so much, Laura. And here is a little bit of what we have coming up tonight. Red flags and telltale signs.
Everyone predicted it.
The grim details from the suspect's social media and the warnings that were given to authorities.
It's not good if we've got gun laws that say criminals can't carry guns and they never get enforced.
Ed Henry is on the scene live with the latest reaction from the White House ahead of President Trump's visit. Plus, a former Maryland high school student recently sentenced to 20 years in prison for plotting to blow up her school after being turned in by an unlikely source. Trace Gallagher has details, and the Senate fails to reach a consensus on immigration again. Chad Pergram is following the latest from Capitol Hill. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. New tonight, hundreds of people are attending a vigil for the victims of Wednesday's mass shooting at a South Florida school. The gathering tonight began with a moment of silence for the 17 who were killed. Audible sobs from the crowd as the names of each victim were read. Dressed in the school's colors, some held flowers while others carried signs asking for action to fight school violence, including more gun control. At one point, members of the crowd spontaneously started shouting, "No more guns, no more guns." We've got team coverage tonight. Leland Vittert covering the warning signs and red flags in the life of the 19-year-old police say has admitted to the massacre. Trace Gallagher takes a look at some of the proposals for stopping school violence and whether they've worked. But first, Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry joining us from Florida, a hospital where one victim remains in critical condition. Ed?
Well, Shannon, breaking tonight, we've gotten our first look at an affidavit with the Broward County Sheriff where Nikolas Cruz admits that he was the gunman, laying out what everyone in the world was expecting, but basically a confession from the killer himself. And the bottom line is 17 dead, but they were expecting that those numbers could have been a lot more because of the carnage they were seeing, particularly at the medical center behind me, one of two hospitals where a lot of people were brought over the last 24 hours. And I can tell you the doctors laid out for us for the first time just how harrowing it was. They say that they had trained for a mass casualty event just like this about 6 months ago, but nothing prepared them for what they had to do. When they got the first call, they called a code green, which meant all hands on deck, a catastrophic event, got all the doctors, nurses, emergency personnel they could. They say, and when you look at this footage, you can see that because of all of the wounds, the EMT personnel are unsung heroes because they stopped the bleeding for so many people who could have died but were saved. Once they were brought here, they were being told and getting phone calls. One patient after another was going to be brought. And so the doctors laid out for us just how difficult it was to save so many lives as the president back in Washington tried to heal a broken nation.
We kept on getting phone calls. Are you ready to receive more patients? Are you ready to take this one? Are you ready to take that one? And always the answer was yes.
Whatever we can do to ease your pain. We are all joined together as one American family, and your suffering is our burden also. No child, no teacher should ever be in danger in an American school.
And the president, as well as First Lady Melania Trump, will have an opportunity in the next few days to potentially do some more healing because, in fact, the president already had an event planned in Orlando on Friday. That's been canceled. He's still planning to come here to South Florida, to Mar-a-Lago, which is only 28 miles away from this very hospital. If you think back to what the president and first lady did after that mass shooting in Las Vegas back in October, they not only met with families of victims, but they also met with first responders, doctors, went to hospitals and medical centers. And so you could see them doing the same as we talk to senior officials who say they're trying to figure out how to respond to all of this. And I can tell you there's also a glimmer of hope tonight amid all of the tragedy, because I mentioned all of the phone calls they were getting at this hospital just 24 hours or so ago as one patient after another came in. Tonight, we can report that between this hospital and another one across town that dealt with these patients, there's only a handful of patients still under doctor's care, and only one of them in critical condition. Shannon?
All right, well, that's a bright spot that there are some recoveries ongoing, and thank you. We're continuing to learn more about the South Florida shooter and the possible warning signs, one being a comment he made online last year that was flagged to the FBI. What did the authorities know about the shooter, if anything, before yesterday? Correspondent Leland Bittert is digging into that story and has more. Hi, Leland.
Good evening, Shannon. To be clear, it's important to distinguish what real warning signs were missed and what is now, in retrospect, a warning sign of Nikolas Cruz's alleged rampage. These are pictures from his Instagram account of ammunition and weapons, of him posing with weapons, a collection of which one could easily describe as an arsenal. He also reportedly posted pictures of dead animals and tortured and terrorized neighborhood pets. Psychologists will tell you the chasm separating harming animals and humans is deep, but not very wide. And then there's this: "I'm going to be a professional school shooter," Cruz allegedly posted as a comment on a YouTube video. The man who posted the video alerted the FBI back in 2017 to that comment, but the Bureau claims there wasn't enough information to connect the online Nikolas Cruz with the real one.
The FBI conducted database reviews, checks, but was unable to further identify the person who actually made the comment.
As often happens in cases like this, students say they knew Cruz had something a little off about him.
Definitely had just something a little off about him.
A lot of kids do jokes around like that, saying that he was the one to screw up the school, but it turns out, everyone predicted it.
Of course, not everyone who exhibits any of these behaviors becomes a mass murderer, making stories like this one so easy to do after a shooting. So perhaps focusing on the response to the warning signs is more important. Case in point, Broward County schools expelled him for disciplinary issues. School officials, though, reportedly, before the expulsion, banned Cruz from carrying a backpack for obvious reasons. Sufficing to say, Shannon, that response to whatever warning signs they had clearly wasn't enough.
And as the sheriff down there said yesterday, some people, if they're determined, no matter what barriers you put up, they're going to find a way. Leland, thank you very much. Well, this case is sparking all kinds of questions, including just how much evidence of potentially violent behavior authorities have to have before they have any legal power to intervene. Trace Gallagher joins us now to talk about cases where tipster actually can make the difference between life and death. Trace.
Shannon, while the high school shooting was happening in Parkland, Florida, across the country in Washington state, another student was in court accused of plotting to bomb and shoot his fellow classmates in Everett, Washington. Joshua O'Connor was turned in by his grandmother, who found his journal entries that said he was preparing himself for a school shooting and that his shot had gotten more accurate. He also wrote that he had learned a lot from past school shooters and wanted the death toll to be as high as possible. Here's what the school district said this about the grandmother. Watch.
I know that it had to have been really hard for her to do that, to turn in her grandson like that. But she, quite honestly, probably saved a lot of lives.
And Joshua O'Connor could be looking at significant prison time, at least if you go by the case of Nicole Savario. She's a Frederick County, Maryland high school student who was sentenced to 20 years for plotting to attack her school. The 19-year-old was turned in by her parents after they found her journal where she detailed her plans to become the, quote, first real female school shooter. Savario said she was planning to attack the school and then kill herself. Her tough sentence has some fearing that other families will be hesitant to turn in their loved ones. Then there's potential political solutions. After the Texas church massacre in November, we learned the gunman was kicked out of the military for domestic assault. That would have prevented prevented him from owning a semi-automatic weapon. Except the Air Force failed to submit his records to the FBI. So Congress introduced the Fix NICS Act, aimed at improving the reporting of criminal records and domestic violence to the FBI. It was introduced with bipartisan support, but many Democrats backed away when the bill was linked to a piece of concealed carry legislation. And finally, numerous studies show that countries with tough gun laws like Japan and Australia have very low rates of gun violence, but U.S. states and cities with strict gun laws have high rates of gun violence. Shannon.
Those are the numbers. All right, Trace, thank you very much. A number of lawmakers spoke out last night to address possible legislative fixes to gun violence. At the same time, SWAT and police teams were still clearing the crime scene in Florida. Today, pressure is mounting for Congress to come up with solutions.
Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, these are forces like ocean currents. You just can't stand in and make them turn around and go back. And so the question is, what do we do? What can you do at the margins, which I think is what politics does, rather than these great, grandiose solutions?
So can the government solve every problem in society? If not, where else should we be looking for solutions? Well, Fox News Politics editor and editor of the Halftime Report, Chris Stirewalt, joins us now to talk about that. Your response there to what Dan had to say?
Dan is smart and Dan is right. And part of the problem, you know, we talk all the time about the expectations that people have for their government. One of the reasons people are so unslakably angry at the federal government is because oftentimes they're asking it to do things that it can't do, that it is not able to do. Incremental change at the margins of things is what the United States government is capable of on domestic policy. We're not going to be able to wage a war on school shootings. And those kinds of changes are rarely satisfactory to people who say the rallying cry after all of these things is always never again. And Washington wants a solution that will do that. They end up, just as we heard Trace talking about, well, who would be opposed to fixing the background check system and syncing it up and making
sure that it works? Support.
Had bipartisan support. And then things got squirrely when Republicans tacked a rider on there and said, well, then you'll vote for this new concealed carry allowance
across
all 50 states, and Democrats backed away. And you just get the sense of how stupid this city is and how broken our politics are.
Well, we do talk about a lot of things. It's natural that we're going to have these discussions about gun control and security at schools and all kinds of things, but it seems like some of the deeper issues really don't get a vetting when we talk about what's happening in our music or video games, our movies, culture, the breakdown of the family, acceptable violence in every level of our society. And people don't want to talk about those things, but you have to, if we're going to have a full conversation, talk about our culture as well.
So we are free because we are self-governing in the sense that Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about the ways in which American communities, families, churches, synagogues, mosques, wherever you hang your spiritual hat, but the way in which American communities regulate themselves, take care of each other, and deal with concerns about things like troubled young people and those things. We're also self-governing in the sense that we have a system of government that within constitutional limits allows the government to reflect the will of the people. Both of those things are pretty badly frayed right now. Both of those things. The fabric of these communities is badly frayed, so people look to the government increasingly, and as they put that new pressure on the government and the government can't respond, trust in those institutions diminishes, and so we have this unraveling. I hate to say it because politics is my business, it's what I've devoted my professional life to, but politics is not adequate to the problems that result in a culture, in a country where you have that's not to say there aren't political answers, but politics is not adequate to address the brokenheartedness and the soul sickness that's in this country.
Here, I want to play one of the things that the Broward County Sheriff had to say about what he would like to see politicians to do, what would give him more power and other law enforcement agencies more power.
Give police the power if they see something on social media, if they see graphic pictures of rifles and blood and gore and guns and bombs. We need to have the power to take that person and bring them before mental health professionals at that particular time, involuntarily, and have them examined.
I mean, there's a lot of trash out there on social media. I mean, how could we even begin to tackle this in that way? Should we be? We
should have sheriff's deputies sitting in every county across America going through Facebook accounts, looking for pictures that are subjectively determined to be too graphic, too gory, too this, too that. You know, look, China does a really good job at preventing dissent, and China doesn't have mass shootings like these, and China doesn't have these problems. You know what else China has? They have something.
No freedom.
Well, they have something called your social score, and your social score reflects all the things you do online. Use facial recognition to track you as you go through your life and your associations. They have everything's pretty cool over there, but in our very messy, often chaotic experiment in self-government, we still prize liberty in all of the amendments to the all of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution.
Which Federalist paper fits best this discussion? I will watch tomorrow to see what you've got.
I feel 10 coming, but you never know. 10's always an easy pick.
10's a winner. All right, and so are you. Good to see you, Chris.
You bet.
All right, other top stories tonight. Elections officials in all 50 states will start getting classified briefings tomorrow and again Sunday from top intelligence officials regarding potential voting threats. The briefings come amid dire warnings from top U.S. intelligence brass that Russia is already meddling in the 2018 midterms. New tonight, Fox News has confirmed that former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon was questioned in special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation this week. He was reportedly grilled for about 20 hours. He was also interviewed by the House Intelligence Committee today. We're told he declined to answer most all of the questions. That's according to the committee's top Democrat, Congressman Adam Schiff. Turning now to Wall Street. The New York Stock Exchange observing a moment of silence for the victims of the Florida high school shooting. And then business went on. The Dow rising for its fifth straight session after last week's very bumpy ride. Well, yesterday's tragic massacre reigniting a debate we hear again and again. Broward County's vice mayor says enforcement of our nation's gun laws is not enough. They need to be reformed entirely. He'll join us next, along with a former FBI special agent who disagrees. Plus, some Democrats call for showing the autopsy photos of shooting victims. A look at how passions are running very high on all sides of this issue. And what are the odds of a DACA deal before the president's March 5th deadline? As things come to a grinding halt in the Senate today, our congressional insider Chad Pergram tells us where we go from here.
Effective enforcement of our gun laws, focusing on criminals and dangerous people, mentally ill people that have been where we have the legal ability to do so, can reduce violence in our communities and improve public safety.
That was Attorney General Jeff Sessions earlier today discussing how he believes senseless tragedies like this mass shooting in South Florida can be avoided. While both sides agree something has to be done, the divide is over what that looks like. Enforcement of the nation's gun laws, or reforming them entirely, or something that's not even related to the law. Mark Bogan is vice mayor for Broward County, and John Iannarelli is a retired FBI special agent. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Mark, I want to ask you first, how are folks doing down there tonight?
Well, it's been tough. First of all, on behalf of the Broward County Commission, we'd like to express our condolences and prayers for the families and victims of this tragedy. It's been really hard on everybody. It's just been an incredible, horrible experience. But what is really appalling, and to be honest with you, Shannon, is that our governor of the state of Florida and several other elected officials from around the state come down here to express their grief, to express their outrage, but then they leave and they support the same laws that allow a teenager to go and buy an assault weapon. So it's just really appalling that people come down here, whether it's a governor or a state senator, and show their, on one hand, show their condolences and their sympathy for what happened, and on the other hand, they support laws that allow teenagers to buy assault weapons. And when you realize that in the past 8 weeks, less than 8 weeks, Shannon, there's been 18 school shootings in the United States. It just, at some point, when does it stop? When will elected officials in our state government make the proper laws to stop this?
I mean, this absolutely is a horrific situation that happened yesterday, but it's important, if we're going to have a factual conversation here, that the Washington Post, I believe, is one of the outlets that fact-checked the 18 shootings, and they said the number is not accurate. So that can be debated. What happened yesterday cannot be debated. I want to play a little bit of what a lawyer for the family where the shooter had been staying, a little bit of what this lawyer had to say, and then we'll get some reaction from both of you.
Sure.
There's a lot of 19-year-olds out here. This is a rural part of the county. This is where people hunt, where people go shooting. There's a lot of 18-year-olds with firearms. This is not about firearms. This is about something went seriously wrong with this kid, and nobody can explain it right now.
But, John, what about the rest of this equation? The fact that he was known to have problems, that he seemingly, you know, by some reports that he lied on background check forms in order to get these guns. I mean, there were clearly things that don't add up that led to what happened yesterday. So what do we do?
Well, the first thing we do is there's got to be some common sense. And I hear what Mark's saying. Obviously, you want to have laws in place to protect you. But having spent my life in law enforcement, there's a lot of laws on the books that people won't obey no matter what. 300 million registered guns in the United States. That doesn't include all the illegal ones. The reality is gun control is not going to be the answer alone. You have to look at mental health and getting others involved who recognize the problems and bringing it forward to law enforcement.
Mark, one of your senators, Marco Rubio, the Republican senator representing you here in D.C., I want to play a bit of what he had to say about trying to find this balance here with gun rights and gun control. Here's what he said on the Senate floor.
And so even as we recognize that the Second Amendment gives Americans the right to bear arms and to protect themselves, a right that I strongly support and will continue to support, we must also recognize that that same Constitution places upon this government an obligation to ensure domestic tranquility and promote general welfare.
I mean, Mark, that sounds like a sensible, fair place to start this conversation. So how does that balance get achieved?
Well, it's interesting that they always bring up the Second Amendment, and we are not disputing the Second Amendment. Many of my friends who belong to the NRA, who have handguns, are saying now that something has to be done with assault weapons. Let's just use the two words, assault weapons. In the state of Florida, for example, you have a 3-day waiting period to buy a handgun. But to buy an assault weapon, you can go in and a few minutes later come out after a background check with no waiting period and buy an assault weapon. So we're distinguishing assault weapons from handguns. The topic today is let's focus in on assault weapons and let's start banning them and stopping allow teenagers from buying them.
And John, I want to bring you in here because I know that for a lot of people, they hear the word assault weapon and it's confusing to them. They don't exactly understand what happens there. We're not talking about machine guns or things that have automatic fire. They do have cosmetic differences and they show up a lot in these crimes, John. So what of what Mark has suggested?
Well, these weapons do show up quite a bit, but just as often as not, handguns show up. Look at the Jared Loughner situation with the Gabrielle Gifford shooting. That individual was using a handgun, yet was ever able to fire 32 rounds in just 11 seconds, killing 6 people. That's why I think the problem goes far beyond just a discussion of guns. It goes to mental health and also people learning how to protect themselves and knowing what to do in these situations.
John and Mark, we thank you both for having this honest conversation about where we go. We just began this conversation. It will last a long time, and it continues in this country. Thank you both for lending your voices.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Well, the president hit Twitter today, hoping to influence Senate votes on immigration reform. We're going to analyze and update exactly what happened there today. Not a whole lot. Plus, we'll have new details tonight about the latest Jane Doe abortion case involving an illegal immigrant minor and the fight over who gets to decide if she has an abortion or not. And what's behind this very disturbing new video from the Cook County Jail in Illinois.
Resolve this. I was hoping we could reach a bipartisan solution that could pass the Senate. Our friends across the aisle were either unable or unwilling to get something done.
There's only one reason why the Senate will be unable to reach a bipartisan solution to DACA: President Trump.
Senate leaders Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer during a series of votes today on immigration. Plenty of finger pointing, but long story short, this week's so-called open debate on immigration was a lot of talk and not a whole lot more. Chad Pergram has traveled over from Capitol Hill to join us here live on the set to break down what happened, or Chad, maybe I should say what didn't happen. So what happens next?
Well, nothing is going to happen in the near term because Congress is out until almost the end of the month, February 26th. There'll be a lot of recriminations over the next week or so. We're already seeing some of those from the White House this evening, finger pointing one side or the other. The two dates to watch in the near term, March 5th. Now, some people debate whether or not that is the date that they have to move on DACA. Nancy Pelosi, the minority leader, was asked a question about that. She thinks that is the date. She says this can't go into deeper March. Here's the other problem. The government is funded through March 23rd. we could be staring at government shutdown number 3. Why? Because if they don't have something resolved on DACA, the president is going to continue to ask for wall funding, and that could be a standoff.
Okay, so who were the losers today?
Well, it was pretty clear that the administration lost. They got behind the plan that Chuck Grassley, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, had authored big time. Grassley came out, pardon me, Grassley came out and said, hey, this is our plan. He said, this is the only plan that can pass. And guess what? It only got 39 votes. They needed 60. You need 60 votes to cut something off in the Senate. This was like invoking reverse cloture. You know, you need 60 votes to end the debate there. And they just didn't get it. So that was the big loser today.
So there were multiple plans, multiple votes that happened today. Were all of them doomed? Could this have turned out differently?
Well, some people have talked about the sequencing of the vote. So the Grassley plan, the most conservative plan, was last. The bipartisan plan was second to last, third vote out of 4 votes here. And some people say, wait a minute, if you look at that vote and it had 54 yeas, why not make that the last one? Because if people say that's the last-ditch effort and this has bipartisan support, you might be able to get to that important 60-vote threshold. Some people were saying, wait a minute, this is going to be it. We can't vote for that conservative plan. It's just too conservative. But if it's something that a bipartisan coalition of senators can agree to, maybe we'll vote for that at the end. And so that was one avenue there that they might have had they resequenced.
It's almost like you've been covering the ins and outs of Capitol Hill and all the strategizing they do over there for a couple of decades. Okay, so now we look ahead to 2018. We're in 2018, but meaning the midterms. The impact there, because, you know, Republicans have said today, and we get these statements today from a number of Republicans saying they're saving this. They didn't want Democrats didn't want to cross the aisle and help us, and we tried to meet them halfway with $1.8 million pathway to citizenship. They want to save this as a campaign issue for the fall. So what's the impact?
Well, there's a reason why Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, wanted to get tax reform done in 2017, because you're going to start to get into primaries very soon. So he wanted to get that issue off the table. So here you have another issue that is just as electric. And if some Republican members start to go with a plan that deals with immigration that some conservative, coalitions just don't want to touch, that's a problem for them. You know, the other thing is look at one of the votes in that series today. Dealt with sanctuary cities. You're going to have a race in Pennsylvania, probably between Lou Barletta, a Republican congressman from Pennsylvania, and Bob Casey, the sitting senator. Lou Barletta, immigration, sanctuary cities, that's his topic #1. He used to be the mayor of Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Right. And so Casey voted no on this, but you had 4 other Democratic senators who are up in Trump territory: Debbie Stabenow in Michigan, Joe Donnelly in Indiana, Claire McCaskill in Missouri, Joe Manchin in West Virginia. They all voted for the sanctuary cities issue. So you see how this is playing into their elections right now, because it is 2018, as you say.
It is. They're thinking ahead. And we could talk forever about the Senate and what may happen there, and the House as well. Chad, thank you for stopping in.
My pleasure.
Good to see you. All right, this is a Fox News alert. You are looking at live pictures now. This is the Los Angeles area. Amid this debate about DACA and immigration we were just discussing with Chad on Capitol Hill, now we're told the LAPD is trying to keep a crowd away from the 101 freeway out there. You know, the traffic is a nightmare out there on a regular day. But the police say now they're trying to apparently block the freeway because there are protesters demonstrating against recent ICE raids across California. There's been a lot of talk about them. The crackdown is beginning to happen. So now apparently there are protesters who want to impede traffic there and make a statement. Police are working on it. We'll keep you updated. In the meantime, a new development in the case of an underage illegal immigrant in U.S. custody. We've seen many of these cases. They're seeking abortions. There's one case now pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. But there's a new case out of Texas and a new twist. The guardians who took a young woman for an abortion while the case was still working its way through the courts wanted to represent another young woman who was in Texas. She's pregnant. She's here illegally. Well, after signing paperwork with those guardians, which the minor says she was forced to do, she changed her mind and told them she did not want to get an abortion. So the Trump administration finally got word of that. She put a handwritten note out. They stepped in when she made her wishes known. Today, they successfully petitioned the court to have those guardians removed and another guardian assigned. Well, some disturbing new video that might get your blood boiling tonight. The Cook County Sheriff's Office in Illinois releasing this video. They say it's inmates clapping for the suspect accused of executing a Chicago police commander, Paul Bauer, on Tuesday. Bauer had answered a call about a fleeing drug suspect. He tried to apprehend that suspect. The two fell downstairs and then shots rang out. Bauer was a 31-year veteran of the Chicago PD. He's been married for 16 years and leaves behind a 13-year-old daughter. After Parkland, the gun control debate is back in the national spotlight. We'll talk about the new narrative that those who stand in the way of, quote, sensible gun reforms are accomplices to the shooter himself. Plus, violent conflicts in Syria on the rise yet again. General Jack Keane joins us to talk about the potential far-reaching impact of both Russia and Iran's roles in that very heated and not ending anytime soon conflict. Tonight, Democrats are coming out swinging in their calls for stricter gun control laws.
There's a reason why this happens in the United States and nowhere else. It's because of congressional inaction. If you are not working today to try to fix this, to try to stop these shootings, then you're an accomplice.
When you see the effect of this extreme violence on a human body, and especially the body of a child, maybe it will shock some people into understanding.
Senator Kamala Harris there talking about potentially showing autopsy photos of shooting victims to get people's attention. Joining me now to talk about it, Rasmussen Reports political analyst Amy Holmes and Democratic strategist New Jersey Senate candidate Michael Starr Hopkins. Great to have you both with us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Shannon.
I just want to take note to something about Senator Murphy, what he said there, because he said how this only happens in the United States and not other countries. That was actually fact-checked by PolitiFact, which is not a super conservative organization by any stretch. And they, when President Obama said something similar in 2015, they said it's just not true. They pointed out other countries that do have mass shootings. So we want to deal in facts here as we're getting into this. All right, where do we go from here, Amy? Because that is always the knee-jerk reaction. And for a lot of people, it makes sense. No one wants to see 17 children and teachers trying to protect them gunned down and dead after a situation like this. We're all scrambling for solutions.
Of course, and Senator Kamala Harris's suggestion that we should be waving around photos of the dead bodies of teenagers, I think, is one of the most kind of grotesque grandstanding. Is this with or without parental permission? I don't think that's helpful at all. But I think if we need to look at the details of this case and what it has in common with previous cases, one of the things that we know is that these shooters, they tend to be copycats. Adam Lanza, for example, had a very detailed chart of previous school shootings and that he wanted to score higher than these other quote-unquote heroes of his. One of the things that we can do is not publicize their photos and their names. Another thing that in terms of this case we're looking at is the FBI, that they were contacted, that this person wrote his name on a comment saying that he wanted to be a professional school shooter and somehow was able to outwit the FBI. Out of 12 people in the whole entire United States, they didn't find this needle in the haystack. I find that very hard to believe. So I think we need to connect the dots there. And then finally, another thing that we can look at is he did have a history of mental health problems. What do we know about that? What could have been factored in? And frankly, Shannon, I understand the First Amendment and freedom of expression as well as the Second. Anyone who publicly declares that they want to be a school shooter, it seems to me, has lost their right and their privilege to own weapons.
Michael, your take?
I was a public defender here in Manhattan. I've seen the autopsy photos of kids that were killed. These look like pictures out of Afghanistan, pictures out of Yemen. This isn't America. We're better than this. And so I think when we have kids repeatedly being murdered, we have to ask why. And we have to look at not just policy when it relates to guns, policy related to mental health, and kind of who we are as a country. We can talk about making America great again, but we actually have to do it. We can't just give lip service to it. And when kids repeatedly are getting killed and politicians can't find the backbone to actually stand up and say that we're going to do something about this, then I actually do agree with Kamala Harris. And we've got to start being uncomfortable in releasing these pictures, because those kids, they were slaughtered. This wasn't just, something that passively happened. Whether it's Sandy Hook, whether it's here, those were war wounds that look like Afghanistan, not something that should be happening in America.
Well, of course, a lot of the conversation has gone to gun control. I want to play something that Senator Marco Rubio, obviously this is his home state of Florida, something he said.
Most of the proposals that have been offered would not have prevented not just yesterday's tragedy, but any of those in recent history.
Now, he said something similar in late 2015. And again, this went through a fact check process at the Washington Post. Not conservative, super big fans of Marco Rubio by any stretch. And here's what they said. They said this is certainly a depressing chronicle of death and tragedy in looking at all these recent mass shootings. But Rubio's statements stands up to scrutiny, at least for the recent past. As he framed it, he earns a rare Geppetto checkmark. They give out Pinocchios based on how much of a lie something is. But Amy, they found this was actually true.
That's right. Glenn Kessler at the Washington Post, he went through, unfortunately, a very long laundry list of mass shootings and found that none of the Democratic proposals would have done anything to change it, including in Senator Harris's home state of California, where you had San Bernardino. None of the proposals on the books would have necessarily impacted the ability of those terrorists to acquire guns, which, in fact, they acquired in some instances illegally. A friend had bought a gun and given it to them. But so I think we need to, I agree with Michael that we need to look at this more holistically. Another question that I would ask, the family that took this young man in, they took him in with his arsenal. Did this not disturb them that someone who had been kicked out of school for behavioral problems, who posted photos on Instagram of killing animals, who was posing with guns and had said himself he wanted to be a school shooter, where, were the red flags being raised and what could have been done about it?
Yeah, so many questions still. Michael, I'll give the final word here to you.
I just think about where can we be safe anymore? If it's not in a church, it's not in a school, it's not in a concert, it's not in a nightclub. We have to have a conversation about who we are, what kind of messages we're putting forth. And this isn't, at this point, we're not talking about Republican or Democrat anymore. We just have to talk about who we are as Americans and what we believe in. And I think we just all need to take a step back and really think about what we believe in, who we are, what matters anymore. And these kids matter.
They absolutely do, and this gets to the heart of our culture and our society, what we're willing to tolerate and what we've allowed to fray at the edges of those societal connections. Much more there to discuss. Amy and Michael, great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shannon.
Well, an international security conference in Germany this weekend, where Russia's so-called bad behavior is expected to dominate the conversation. Plus, what Secretary Mattis is saying tonight about the ongoing war in Syria and new tensions the U.S. is facing on that front. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis has been meeting with defense officials from around the globe ahead of a security conference in Munich. Many of those meetings considering what role Russia and NATO members will play, especially Turkey, as war in Syria is reportedly entering a dangerous new phase. General Jack Keane is a retired four-star general and Fox News senior strategic analyst. Great to have you with us today.
Good to be here, Sharon.
Okay, so I want to read you something, a quote from Joost Hitlerman, director of the Middle East and North Africa program at the International Crisis Group. He says most of the conflicts that you see now have nothing to do with Syria per se. They just happen to be fought there. It seems like so much of this is a proxy war, multiple proxy wars.
Yeah, I mean, Syria certainly started out as a civil war. Assad was trying to put down his people. This is all about the Arab Spring. Remember, going all the way back to 2010 when the Arab Spring began, and then the civil war began in 2011 in Syria. But quite frankly, right now what we have is the Iranians and the Russians have successfully propped up the Assad regime, particularly with Russian military intervention and huge commitment on the part of the Iranians. They run the war in Syria. Syria is now a client state of Iran. That's as horrible as that is, as much as we don't like it, that's a fact. And the second thing is that they're trying to drive the United States out of Syria and really out of the Middle East. Add to that that the Turks have opened up a front in northwestern Syria to take territory away from the Syrian Kurds, who they believe are threatening the sovereignty of Turkey. Add to that that the Iranians are encroaching on Israel from Syria, where they want to establish bases for rockets and missiles to be able to fire into Syria, into Israel. Israel is not going to permit that to happen. These are the added complications to what has taken place in Syria.
So what can we do now? This thing has raged on so long. We've got a new administration now tackling what many people say the last administration did not successfully wrap up. This continues to rage on. What can the U.S. do? What can we do with our allies in the region?
Yeah, very good question. First of all, what happened with the Russians recently, this last week, where the Russians used hybrid forces, some 500 to 600 troops, attacking a U.S. coalition base where we have U.S. forces at it. I believe they thought we were vulnerable because we pulled a lot of our drones and other ISR surveillance vehicles out of Syria and put them in Afghanistan, and they thought they could get away with it. Air power saved the day. But the reality is that was a big deal. We've got Russian ground forces attacking a U.S. base that we have coalition forces on it. They think they can get away with it like they did in Crimea and also in Ukraine because it's, quote, hybrid forces. It's not Russian military forces. We've got to call them out on this and make certain not only will we defend ourselves, you do that again, and we will confront you at your bases. We're not going to tolerate that to happening. The larger issue that you're asking, the complications of Syria and the Middle East itself, writ large, Iran's aggressive, malign behavior, we need a multinational effort. The administration is well aware of that. And I think it's, I would describe it so our audience would understand. We kind of need like an Arab NATO to push back on the Iranian and Russian malign behavior in the region, much as we successfully done with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, post-World War II. And we got to get the Sunni Arabs more involved than what they are involved. As we were talking before we started in the introduction, this is their backyard. And they've got to be hands-on in here, and we can help. We've got intelligence, we got capability. We're not talking about a lot of U.S. forces or anything like that. We're talking about getting them more involved.
Well, we all have interest in that region. They, as you said, it's their backyard, but we do as well, even across the sea. So we'll see how that all works together as this continues on. General, always glad to have you with us.
Good talking to Shannon.
Thank you. All right, more news right after this break. To what happened at that school yesterday. For tonight, most watched, most trusted, and most grateful.
These kids often turn out to be productive, decent human beings. When there isn't any of that taking place, then they end up going to adult court or turning out to be people like Nikolas Cruz. The issue of the Second Amendment and gun rights is not negotiable. It's been decided. There are 300 million guns in America, and the vast majority are owned by law-abiding Americans who, by the way, often use them to protect themselves against people like Nikolas Cruz. So that's not going to happen.
Well, President Trump, in the meantime, is planning to visit Florida as soon as this weekend after addressing the nation in a powerful speech offering his support to all Americans.
Our entire nation, with one heavy heart, is praying for the victims and their families. I want you to know that you are never alone and you never will be. You have people who care about you, who love you, and who will do anything at all to protect you.
Well, the president also saying that he is committed to helping secure our schools and tackle the difficult issue of mental health. In the meantime, a football coach, a janitor, a freshman soccer player, and 14 others we are now getting our first look at the faces of the victims of that horrific shooting. Marianne Rafferty joins us now live from Los Angeles with some of the heartbreaking reaction and the stories of heroism. Good morning, Marianne.
Good morning, Heather. In a painful remembrance, family, friends, and survivors gathering last night for an emotional vigil honoring the young lives lost. All 17 victims have now been identified, many of them in their early teens. They were athletes, dancers, members of the marching band, and volunteers. One teacher, the school's athletic director, and a football coach all killed and being hailed as heroes, protecting their students as so many other teachers reportedly did.
All of a sudden you hear bah, 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 bah in the stairwell, and then my teacher right away, she goes like this. She opens her classroom right away, and she's like, everyone get in. If it wasn't for that, I think we could have all been dead.
The Parkland community coming together at last night's vigil, attempting to shine light during these darkest of days. One of the victims' dads finding the strength to address the crowd.
She runs out behind, and she's like, I got to go, Dad, bye. And I don't always get to say, I love you. I don't remember if I said that to Jamie yesterday. What is unfathomable is Jamie took a bullet and is dead. I don't know what I do next. My wife is home. We are broken.
An unimaginable scenario for any parent, that tragic reality now facing 17 families. Meanwhile, a GoFundMe page has been set up to help those families. More than $630,000 has already been raised. Heather?
Yeah, hopefully we will continue to focus on these families and the lives that were lost and all those kids that have to, at some point, go back to school. That does definitely need to remain the focus. So thank you so much. Appreciate it, Marianne. But in the meantime, we do have House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi saying that Congress is complicit for the nation's gun violence. The California Congresswoman accusing Republicans of refusing to pass tougher gun laws a day after the Florida shooting.
It's an assault on our whole country, and they are paying the price for our inaction. Whose political survival in this body is more important than the survival of our children? Who of us in here is more important? Whose political survival is more important than that? Nobody's.
Well, Pelosi now calling on House Speaker Paul Ryan to consider legislation that would expand background checks and create a special committee to address gun violence. Well, the State Department, in some other news, will be closing more than 20 refugee resettlement offices across the U.S. That's according to Reuters. And they'll also be reducing operations at 40 others following President Trump's decision to downsize the program. Our commander-in-chief allowing up to 45,000 refugees into the U.S., drastically cutting it from the 110,000 set by the Obama administration. The State Department reviewing the closures before final approval, saying that the offices are no longer needed due to the drop. And Steve Bannon interrogated for 20 hours this week by Robert Mueller's special counsel. The combative former White House chief strategist reportedly answering all their questions with no topic off limits. This is in sharp contrast to his appearance in front of the House Intelligence Committee, refusing to answer lawmakers' questions. Mueller is currently investigating possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, but so far nothing's been found. And an Austrian snowboarder's Olympic dreams coming to an end after breaking his neck during the cross quarterfinals. This was horrifying. Marcus Scherer losing control on the final jump, landing in the snow on his back. Yeah, his goggles flying. Doctors say that he didn't show any signs of brain damage, though. That's good. He will return to Austria for further treatment. The United States dropping to the 5th in the medal count with 5 golds. Norway leading with 6 gold medals. And the time now is about 11 minutes after the top of the hour. The FBI may have had an opportunity to find the suspect months before the Florida shooting.
In 2017, the FBI received information about a comment made on a YouTube channel. The comment simply said, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter."
So how did they miss it? A security analyst is up next to explain how the trail went cold. And applause for a cold-blooded killer, the disgusting video showing inmates cheering on the man suspected of murdering a police officer. And the immigration debate hits a wall in the Senate. What the president has to say about where we go from here. We're live in Washington. Welcome back. The FBI tipped off 5 months ago about the Florida shooter from a user on YouTube.
In 2017, the FBI received information about a comment made on a YouTube channel. The comment simply said, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." The FBI conducted database reviews, checks, but was unable to further identify the person who actually made the comment.
So what was done right here and what fell through the cracks? Joining me now is security analyst Ryan Mauro. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So this was a pretty interesting development that came out yesterday when the FBI, they walked out because this news had leaked. This YouTube blogger had turned in this comment that was written on his page by another YouTube user who used his actual name, Nicholas Cruz, saying that he wanted to be a school shooter. So what did the FBI do right and what did they do wrong?
Well, how many times have we been told, if you see something, say something? Well, that happened here, and it doesn't appear that much was done. Now, what the FBI is saying is that there are a lot of people with this name. They checked their databases, and there is no way to link that YouTube account to this individual and find out who it was. But I find that answer to be very unsatisfactory because there's more things you can do besides that. So, for example, did the FBI contact YouTube and say to them, help us try to track the IP address or the location of this individual beyond just checking their own internal databases? Did the person that reported the comment to the FBI, did the FBI follow up with that individual and say, could you please try to engage him since he obviously wants to talk to you?
Well, they went and talked to him.
Not to have happened.
I know that they did go and talk to him. He was a bail bondsman, I think, was it from Mississippi? And he said that the FBI did come and talk to him, but he said, I don't know this guy. He's just some guy that made a comment on my YouTube page.
Right, but they could have asked him to engage the person that was making that comment, because someone that's making a comment like that is trying to socialize. They want to talk.
That's a good idea. I do wonder if they did that. And I wondered when the FBI made that comment yesterday if they were even aware that until the shooting happened that he was using his real name.
Right, that's true, and really we just need a better accounting from the FBI rather than saying, look, you didn't show up in our databases and there was no way for us to just take a YouTube username and find out who it is. I want to find out if the information flow was done properly. If it was a lack of resources, then we need to know that. If it was because they felt legally there wasn't much that they could do, because you can't do much when someone makes a statement that's extreme or even violent in intent. You can't go necessarily raid their home and take away their gun. Then that's something we also need to know so we can have a conversation about it. To give you an idea of how big the security gap is, consider this. According to FBI statistics, about 90% of the people on terror watch lists who try to buy a gun succeed in doing so. The other 10% are blocked because of reasons that have nothing to do with terrorism. So if even suspected terrorists are able to buy guns, then people with violent intentions on social media also can do so.
Going back to the FBI needing more resources, because I was thinking about this yesterday when we heard about this Nikolas Cruz YouTube incident falling through the cracks. This isn't the first time that we've heard about someone being on the radar of the FBI. You know, the Boston bombers, they were on the radar of the FBI. I think that you and I actually talked about that. This has happened multiple times. San Bernardino, it happened as well. So does the FBI just need some more resources? Is that what's happening here?
More resources is always going to be the easy answer to give for these type of situations, because there's never going to be enough resources. So we have to think outside the box. We don't know yet if people reported the other social media activity where the shooter was talking about killing police and showing off his weapons. What about the abuse of animals? I mean, there's a very high correlation between someone who hurts animals and then hurts human beings. Tougher laws on that can actually impact this problem as well. So let's think outside the box and have a narrow focus and not cause political paralysis with broad gun control debates. Let's have a narrow focus if you're going to talk about gun control and different types of legislation so that we can get something passed quickly with overwhelming support.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation to talk about. I mean, I know the Broward County Sheriff talked about it yesterday. You know, what can you do if these red flags are present, like what was present with this kid? What can you do? So, all right, thank you so much for joining us, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, the Senate is still deadlocked on DACA as the White House issues a blistering threat to veto the bipartisan plan. A live report from Washington, D.C., where lawmakers are now heading back to the drawing board. Griff Jenkins here with that up next. Well, a bipartisan immigration plan fails in the Senate after President Trump threatens to veto it. DHS even slamming it, saying that it destroys their ability to remove illegal immigrants from this country. But the House is moving forward with their hardline bill. Griff Jenkins is live for us in Washington, D.C. with a look at what is happening. Griff, that is a good question. What is happening?
Yeah, not much, Heather. Good morning. Let the finger pointing begin. The Senate failed to pass all 4 bills to protect Dreamers and strengthen border security, including the bipartisan one that had the support of 8 Republicans and most Democrats, but it faced a White House veto in the White House, placing the blame on the Democrats. Here's a statement from the White House saying, today the Schumer Democrats in the Senate demonstrated again that they are not serious about DACA, they are not serious about immigration reform, and they are not serious about Homeland Security. They continue, yet the Schumer Democrats chose to filibuster it because they are held hostage by the radical left in their party, which opposes any immigration control at all. But Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says the president is the one to blame.
I regret that the only bipartisan effort of the group of moderate senators to come up with a bipartisan compromise couldn't get the necessary 60 votes. I salute the 8 brave Republicans who voted for the bipartisan compromise. But, Mr. President, there's only one reason why the Senate will be unable to reach a bipartisan solution to DACA: President Trump.
3 Democrats crossed the aisle on the Grassley bill, which most closely aligned with the White House's goals, although it got the most votes against it. Now, Senator Graham says the bill is in the president's corner.
The only way I see a solution is for the president to grab the reins back and lead himself and get Democrats and Republicans in a room focusing on strong border security and a fair solution for DACA. Get that done, then move to comprehensive.
So the House will next take a shot at this with the conservative Bob Goodlatte bill. But lawmakers, Heather, are in recess until February 26th, and we have that March 5th deadline looming. So we'll see what happens.
Wow. That's, you know, we keep hearing they have all this work to do and they keep going on recess. You know, that you would think they would delay it, but I guess not. Thank you so much, Griff. Appreciate it. Well, Denver's police union president, in the meantime, testifying before Congress, blaming the city's heroin epidemic on its new immigration policies. And Nick Rogers says that Denver's so-called sanctuary city ordinance is hindering them from busting some of the city's biggest drug dealers.
The ordinance has created, in my opinion, a city that is much less safe than it was prior to this ordinance. We can no longer call and share information with ICE. They can no longer call and ask us for assistance.
Well, Denver's police chief slamming that testimony, accusing Rogers of not understanding the city's immigration policy. Well, despite the left's claims that ICE agents are rounding up innocent illegal immigrants, nearly 90% of those arrested last year had criminal records or pending charges. Now, the new numbers from Pew Research showing a stark difference between the Trump and the Obama administrations. In 2009, immigrants without past convictions accounted for 61% of those arrested by ICE. Only 11% had clean records in President Trump's first year. Well, the time now is about 27 minutes after the top of the hour, and just hours after a teenager opened fire, killing 17 people in a Florida high school. The conversation very quickly shifted to gun control.
But as a consequence of our inaction, we are responsible.
There will be a moment of silence, then the Congress of the United States will do absolutely nothing.
But are tighter gun laws the answer, or does the problem run much deeper? We debate up next. And applause for a cold-blooded killer, the disgusting video showing inmates cheering on the man suspected of murdering a police officer. Well, the gun control debate raging on in Washington as Attorney General Jeff Sessions declares we have to confront this problem.
I think effective enforcement of our gun laws, focusing on criminals and dangerous people, can reduce violence in our communities and improve public safety. We can and we must do better.
We can and we must, but are gun laws, more gun laws, the only answer? Here to debate, GOP strategist and contributor for The Hill and Washington Examiner Jen Kearns and liberal political commentator Wendy Acefo. Thank you both for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather.
So you can't listen to these kids involved in this shooting yesterday and not realize something does need to be done. But then what is the answer? And that's a tough one. Jen, I'll start with you. We heard the Attorney General saying there that something does need to be done. Is it more gun laws?
Well, I think General Sessions is right. We must solve this problem, but I don't think the answer is more gun laws. Look, we're looking at two real problems here. The first is this is a mental health problem. There's a similar factor in all of these school shootings that they are perpetrated by young male teenage men who have anger and angst, and every single one of them do not have a father in the home. So it's a wider cultural problem and mental health problem. The gun alone is not the problem here. He had a gas mask. He had smoke bombs. He could have used a regular bomb to kill more people. He could have used his car, as terrorists have been using lately, and done a great deal of damage. As school was letting out, he could have killed many more students. And the second problem here, and I think this is the real problem, the NRA, liberals hate the NRA more than they love our defenseless children. And proof of that is the fact that they won't support common sense gun laws like 41% of Americans believe should be done. A simple armed security guard at every school, just as we had, by the way, in the 60s, in the civil rights era. We had
there was an
armed
security guard, I believe, at this particular location, but there are 3,200 kids in this school. It's huge. Wendy, I want you to answer to some of those things that you just heard Jen say.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if all we have are thoughts and prayers to offer our victims, then we have failed as a society. When we look at Las Vegas, when we look at the Texas shooting, when we look at now Parkland, what is a common denominator is AR-15s. 3 out of 5 of the worst mass shootings in our nation has happened under this administration. And the only thing that has been done has been Trump has rolled back Obama-era regulations that has inherently made it easier for people with mental illnesses to get a gun. So what we're looking at here is an issue that a 18-year-old is able to get an AR-15, but at 21 has to wait to get a handgun and has to wait till 21 to buy alcohol. That inherently is flawed. And Jen said something about mental health. Well, that is actually an affront to people with mental illness, because not everyone with the mental illness is a mass murderer. So this is a binary issue here. We're dealing with mental illness, and we're also dealing with gun regulations, and we need to go there.
Right. And I agree with you, but at the same time, you know, you say not everyone with mental illness is a mass murderer. Not everyone that owns a gun is a mass murderer either.
And that's why it's binary.
Yeah. All right. So let's move to this next topic, though. Multiple immigration plans. 4 multiple ones blocked in the Senate after President Trump calls one proposal a, quote, total catastrophe. So, Jen, is this a catastrophe? What's happening? I mean, there's no bipartisanship, obviously, on immigration.
Well, I think one thing we know from Donald Trump's art of the deal is sometimes you have to make the opposition feel as if there is no deal and bring them back to the table. I think that's exactly what President Trump is doing here. Look, I think this will be a catastrophe for Democrats as the March 5th deadline is quickly approaching, because they have proven after 8 years of Barack Obama parading these DACA kids into the Oval Office, and they're doing absolutely nothing for them. President Trump has proven that he's at least willing to give them a path to citizenship.
Yeah. And they're going on break. They're taking a break, Wendy, until February 25th. We just heard Griff speak about that with this March 5th deadline looming. So what do you think? Is it a catastrophe?
I think what's a catastrophe here are the 700,000 DACA recipients that their lives are being used as a political football, you know, and I think that the president is really trying to torpedo this. And when we look at the numbers, the bill that got the most votes was not the president's bill in which he said to back, which was Grassley. That actually got 39 votes. So we need to come together in a bipartisan manner, but I do not think, and this goes for both sides of the aisle, that they're going to do comprehensive immigration reform until 2019. So right now they need to make a pivot and focus on the DACA issue and try to fix that. But as far as comprehensive immigration reform, that's not going to happen this year.
All right.
Well, Wendy ought to talk to her Democrat colleagues who sat on their hands during the State of the Union. We could use a little more bipartisanship there.
Yeah, we'll see if that happens. Thank you both for joining us. Appreciate it today.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
You too.
Well, the FBI tipped off about the Florida school shooter's deadly plans months ago. A YouTuber says that he actually contacted the feds in September after a user named Nicholas Cruz wrote on his video, quote, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." And vlogger Ben Benight says that local FBI agents interviewed him the very next day.
They're very responsive. They came out very polite, professional. They got the information. They got a copy of the screenshot, wrote down, you know, information, questions they asked me. It was disturbing that somebody would write something like that, but I never would have thought that they meant it.
Well, the FBI says that they were unable to identify the person who made the comment, and we will talk with that YouTuber, Ben Benight, live at 6:15 Eastern. Well, disturbing surveillance video showing inmates applauding the man accused of murdering a Chicago police commander. You can see them behind bars as officers walk this suspect, Shamari Leggett. Well, the convicted felon charged with first-degree murder denied bail in court. He's accused of gunning down Commander Paul Bauer while running from the officers. And Bauer, a 31-year-old veteran, or 31-year veteran of the force, leaves behind a wife and a daughter. The inmates who clapped will likely face some consequences. And the FISA court now responding to requests from Republican leaders for information on the surveillance of a Trump campaign advisor. Judge Rosemary Collyer, who presides over the National Security Court, telling the House Intelligence Committee that their requests are the first of their kind. And the court now figuring out how to approach it. A memo by GOP staff on the committee made public earlier this month accused DOJ and FBI officials of using information in an unverified dossier to secure a FISA warrant. And the time now is about 20 minutes until the top of the hour. The Florida shooter bragged about his love for violence, leaving behind a disturbing digital footprint. Kurt, the cyber guy, is here with what to watch for online. And saved with seconds to spare, how the shooter gave one student a warning just seconds before opening fire. Police now turning their attention to the shooter's social media pages. His shocking Instagram post detailing a twisted obsession for guns, violence, and hurting animals.
We've already began to dissect his websites and the things that social media that he was on, and some of the things that have come to mind are very, very disturbing.
So how did school and law enforcement officials miss these warning signs, and what can be done to prevent another tragedy? Joining us now to weigh in is the cyber guy, Kurt Knutson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Heather, good morning. The question I have this morning is, where are the social media companies in all of this in terms of culpability? What did they do to help the FBI when they did come to the database and say, all right, we see some troubling things on not only YouTube with a comment that was left there, but also on Instagram, where he clearly had two accounts here. What is their role in helping authorities track down this type of violence when we know the signals? We know they're there. What have they done?
It goes specifically because everybody's asking about the FBI and this YouTube vlogger and the comment that was made. It would have been fairly easy for Google owns YouTube, right?
Google owns YouTube. Facebook owns Instagram.
Okay.
So you're dealing with two big powerhouse social media companies. And the question is, what are they doing to help us in this country prevent this in the future? And what do they do in this recent case that is so tragic that they could have done? Because there is technology that can spot and tell the tone and tenor of violent language online.
And Facebook says they do that. Clearly they do not, because they did not shut down this suspect's Facebook and Instagram pages until after this incident happened.
Aside from a warrant from the FBI, they're not going to hand over any proactive information to law enforcement, and that is tragic in and of itself right there. So what can you do right now before we rattle the cages over with social media? And I do want to wake up that call this morning. What can we do right now? And I would say this is the moment across this country to pick up the phone and become aware of faster and easier ways to report trouble that you see in social media. So what do you do to do that? You call your school right now that your kids are at, and you say, what is your plan? What are you planning to do here? And then you find out that they may have already address that you text to or email to or a specific phone number. You need to get really tight on that. Find out that emergency plan that the school has, and then create an entry in your own smartphone that gets you right to that contact the second you have something like this happen. Timing is everything on the response of a school shooting like this. So have that entry inside of your smartphone, and then you'll be ready to go with any sort of threat that goes on. And then also schools need a wake-up call. They need budgeting. They need budgeting to get the latest technology, including technology right now allows them to do geofencing. So the school
exactly is the geofencing?
So you can actually put a perimeter that you define, say 5 miles around a school and on campus, that if violent type of language gets triggered along with the school name or along with other key words that relate to the school, or if it's on the premises of the school or nearby, you could say, hey, we need to take a closer look at that. So it's an automated alert system, but those cost money, and schools need to get them, though.
That's interesting.
There's no question they've got to get it.
Yeah.
And then also you're dealing with technology like this one, which is, once an event is about, is happening, what are you doing to arm your teachers and other school officials?
So this is a School Guard app.
This is actually created by a law enforcement officer. Okay. This is brilliant. This is called School Guard, and this goes on a phone of every teacher and the principal and administration of the school. The second they hit this panic button, it does 4 things. It calls 911. It lets everyone inside the school know that there's a problem. It sends the map of where the problem is, and then it also triggers Hero 911, which 50,000 officers around the country already have.
Wow.
And police officers that are nearby immediately get that same information so that they can respond within seconds, not minutes.
So it tells you the location of the problem as well?
It tells you where the panic button was pressed.
Because I'm wondering if that would have assisted in this particular incident, because, all these kids, they ran out of their classrooms, some of them many into the line of fire.
However, before the running even started, the second the first teacher were to press that button,
and they would have known
it is
stay in your
notifying.
class.
So what we know now is in Broward County that there are 100 to 200 officers that have this on their phone. The second that was pressed, it would alert them right then. They would have been able to respond right then. What could have changed? Maybe nothing in this case. But it certainly is very important technology to take a closer look at to keep our kids safe.
It's another tool to have in your arsenal, so that's never a bad thing. All right, thank you so much, Kurt. Appreciate it. And we will be right back. Stay with us. Well, we're learning some brand new details about the shooter in Florida, Nikolas Cruz. He made some shocking Instagram posts. He was kicked out of school, and he was also pegged as a loner.
Honestly, a lot of people were saying that it was going to be him, stuff like that. We threw a lot of kids threw jokes around like that, saying that he was going to be the one to scoot up the school. But it turns out, everyone predicted it. That's crazy.
So what happened here, and why do kids kill? Specifically, this one. Dr. Dominic Sportelli is a board-certified psychiatrist, and he joins me now live. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, lots of questions today as more information came out about this Nikolas Cruz yesterday.
Yeah, we have to look at situations like this. I like to use the analogy, the perfect storm. There are so many variables that make us who we are as people, so many things that contribute to our personality. We have to look at big picture. We have to look at totality. If you look at the way the FBI sort of analyzes or profiles mass shooters, they look at various things, 4 things basically. Number 1, they look at the person's individual personality. How does he cope with things? How does he deal with frustration? What does he get angry about, right? The second thing they look at is family. Let's look at his family. Right. How was he raised? What was his family life like?
And we know a couple things there. We know that, he was obviously an angry kid. He had already been kicked out of school. He was going to this alternative school. We know that he had threatened students, which is part of the reason that he was kicked out. We know that he was adopted by 2 older parents, and then his adopted mom just died, a month ago?
A month ago, he lost his mother. He was moving in with a new environment. He was out of school, making a transition from school to sort of, out in the real world, right? Which is also a difficult time for kids. But the other thing they look at is school dynamic. What was he like when he was in school? How did he associate with his peers? Was he a loner? Was he involved in sports, things like that? And then you have to look at the social aspect. What was he like in the community? Did he belong to any groups, any clubs? Was he isolative? Those are the 4 things that the FBI looks at when they're looking at profiling these individuals. And we see a lot of these red flags just about throughout all of those 4 domains with him.
Yeah, other kids that have been interviewed, they said they described him specifically as a loner, as strange. They felt uncomfortable. They were scared to be around him. All of those things were attributed to him.
Yeah, here's an important point, too, is a lot of people will call these mass shooters loners when it's The important thing to understand is they don't want to be loners, right? They're loners because they can't fit in. They have a very difficult time blending in with peers and peer groups and adults. It's very difficult for them.
Which is why they may tend towards social media, which is a whole nother issue. And then there were a lot of red flags with Nikolas Cruz's social media as well. See, things that he posted on Instagram, these violent tendencies, gun pictures, pictures of harming animals.
Yep, harming animals is a big thing, because what you're seeing with harming animals is you're seeing a lack of empathy. If someone can hurt a defenseless animal, they have no feeling, they have no remorse, they have no guilt. Also, they're manifesting anger to actually injure something and somehow maybe develop some joy in that, in harming things. There's something called in psychology the McDonald triad. A lot of serial homicide people will injure animals. Well, injuring animals, bedwetting, and fire setting, that's the triad that we see. But injuring animals is a big one. It's high on the list.
You know, yesterday I heard a young girl speaking with Martha MacCallum, and it was really remarkable. She was in the classroom. She lost a friend of hers, shot and killed. She was crying. She said, you know, the suspect, she ran into him. He worked at the dollar store, apparently, near her. And she said her recollection of him was that she went in the dollar store and he offered her a free balloon. So he had that as well, you know, and so I think that correlates with he was trying to reach out.
That's a very, very important point, and it goes back to that. They do try. It's not that they want to be isolated. And don't forget, when they're going back to a school to shoot, there's a reason they're shooting at a school and not a shopping mall or an airport or some other. There are many, many other places they can choose. That's symbolic. That's their childhood. That's where they receive the most frustration and maybe, you know, disengagement and maybe bullying or whatever it was that went on. That's symbolic for them.
Yeah, and he had also broken up with a girlfriend, apparently was having some issues, and it was Valentine's Day.
Relationship issues is a big trigger as well.
Lots of questions. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us.
It was a heartbreaking thing to do because you couldn't let him in. You couldn't help him. Unfortunately, he passed away.
I don't know how you get over that. Now, Haley Betancourt says that she and others in her creative writing class barricaded themselves in the classroom during that rampage. And hiding from the gunshots was actually history repeating itself. Listen to this. For one family in Florida, student Carly Novell tweeting, quote, "This is my grandpa when he was 12 years old. He hid in a closet while his family was murdered during the first mass shooting in America. Almost 70 years later, I also hid in a closet from a murderer. These events should not be repetitive. Something has to change." A Novell referring to the 1949 mass shooting when a lone gunman shot and killed 13 people in New Jersey. And that gives you chills. Well, that wraps up this hour of Fox and Friends First. But Fox and Friends First continues right now. I'll see you back here later. Have a great weekend.
It is Friday, February 16th. A Fox News alert. The demons made him do it. The Florida massacre suspect claiming the voices in his head made him carry out that deadly ambush. His first court appearance as President Trump prepares to visit with the victims.
Our entire nation, with one heavy heart, is praying for the victims and their families.
The new approach the White House is now taking to keep schools safe. And was the FBI warned about his disturbing plot 5 months ago? Fox and Friends First continues right now. You are watching Fox and Friends First on this Friday morning. I'm Jillian Mealy.
Good morning to you, Jillian. I'm Rob Schmidt here live in Parkland, Florida, right outside Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School here, the scene of this horrific crime this week. And just about a day and a half later, we're getting a much clearer picture of the person who carried out this crime, this young man, Nikolas Cruz, a young man with an obsession with guns, with violence, who boasted about killing animals, and who says that he committed this crime, told police he committed this crime and had demons in his head telling him to do so. A young man whose adoptive mother died just this past fall, who was expelled from high school here last year, about a year ago, and just 3 days later bought an AR-15, the rifle that he used to commit this horrible crime. We are also getting an outline of exactly how this all went down, a timeline, I should say, of how this happened on Wednesday, on Valentine's Day, when this horrific act took place. And it was a pretty fast-moving event as it went down. 2:06, the young man in the afternoon, 2 o'clock, 2:06 in the afternoon, he gets an Uber to the school. At 2:21, he enters into the east stairwell of one of the buildings here. Not sure how he got access into the building, how he was able to get in, but we'll analyze that a little bit later on. Gets into the building, 2:21, gets ready, prepares himself, walks out, and shoots into classrooms on the first and second floor for less than 5 minutes. Only about 3 or 4 minutes is all the longer that this shooting lasted, and he was able to kill 17 people and put more than a dozen others into the hospital in just that short period of time. And then he moves up to the third floor of the building. He drops the gun, walks back down the stairs, and runs out of this high school among all of the other students who are in a panic trying to get away from the bullets as the fire alarm is going off, as the shooting is happening. By 2:20, or by 2:50, I should say, he gets to a Walmart, which is right near campus. He hangs out there. He gets a soda from the Subway at the Walmart. And then at 3:01, he gets to a McDonald's nearby there. And by 3:41, he is found by a police officer in a neighborhood right here near the school. He is arrested there without incident. And we go to his first appearance in court, which happened yesterday afternoon. And we see a cowering and a nervous 19-year-old kid standing there, which was just shocking to see him being consoled by his attorney after committing such a heinous crime. A young man charged with 17 counts of premeditated murder at this point, and his attorney actually showing some compassion for him.
He's a broken human being. He's a broken child. The sadness that this community is feeling, I mean, my children are, they go to school in this community. I feel horrible for these families, and Mr. Cruz feels that pain.
Well, it certainly is just a terrible, a horrendous crime that this young man is charged with. We also know that the FBI had a warning about this through a YouTube comment that was allegedly left by this young man months ago, saying that he was a school shooter in training, and also a lot of questions about what the school knew here. Obviously, this young man was not allowed on campus with a backpack. He was deemed such a threat. He had been expelled from here. How did he get into the school? How was that stairwell not locked up? These schools are supposed to be fortresses. You're not supposed to be able to just walk into a school anymore. A lot of questions remain to be answered. Jillian, I'll send it back to you.
So many questions. That's right, Rob. Thank you. President Trump planning to visit Florida as soon as the weekend after addressing the nation in a powerful speech offering his support to all Americans.
Our entire nation, with one heavy heart, is praying for the victims and their families. I want you to know that you are never alone and you never will be. You have people who care about you, who love you, and who will do anything at all to protect you.
The president also saying he's committed to helping secure our schools and tackle the difficult issue of mental health. Just take a look at these faces. A football coach, a janitor, a freshman soccer player, and 14 others. We are now getting our first look at the faces of the victims of that horrific shooting. Marianne Rafferty joins us live in Los Angeles with some of the heartbreaking reaction and stories of heroism. Marianne.
Good morning, Jillian. Family, friends, and survivors gathering last night for an emotional vigil honoring the young lives lost, many of them in their early teens. All 17 now identified. They were athletes, dancers, members of the marching band, and volunteers. A teacher, the school's athletic director, and a football coach, all killed and hailed as heroes, protecting students from gunfire. The brother of Coach Aaron Feis struggling with the loss, as so many loved ones are.
Just, you know, that he was a good man, that he loved people, you know, he loved the kids that he worked for at the school, and that he wasn't afraid, you know, to protect and to lay it down.
The community coming together at last night's vigil, attempting to shine light during the darkest of days.
Some of my friends won't get to see their brothers and sisters ever again. It was one of the worst days of my life. The worst day.
One of the victims' dads somehow finding the strength to address the crowd.
I don't remember if I said that to Jamie yesterday. What is unfathomable is Jamie took a bullet and is dead. I don't know what I do next. My wife is home. We are broken.
An unimaginable scenario for any parent. That tragic reality now facing 17 families. Another dozen or so others are still recovering after Wednesday's massacre. Jillian?
So sad. Marianne Rafferty, thank you. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi says Congress is complicit in the nation's gun violence. The California Congresswoman accusing Republicans of refusing to pass tougher gun laws just a day after the Florida school shooting.
It's an assault on our whole country, and they are paying the price for our inaction. Whose political survival in this body is more important than the survival of our children? Who of us in here is more important? Whose political survival is more important than that? Nobody's.
Pelosi now calling on House Speaker Paul Ryan to consider legislation that would expand background checks and create a special committee to address gun violence. Responding to Nancy Pelosi and her Democratic colleagues, former LAPD detective Mark Furman says there's a better approach. He says in this day and age, school security should be among the top priorities for districts across America.
I just think that there's a better approach. When you have retired personnel, they have the best part of their career behind them, and you need a generational gap that isn't 2 or 3 generations, perhaps just better part of one. These officers on the school need to be able to interact with these students and get that information that a guy like Cruz would have surfaced and they would have actually confided in the officer. You need to get some kind of a system where you have protocols for all these schools so everybody is working off the same sheet of music, and you need to harden the inside target so the suspect can't get in, and you create the tactical situation for a shooter on the outside, which allows responding officers and the security officers to take out the suspect with no danger to the students. I think this is all possible without gun control.
Taking advantage of the Parkland shooting victims will not be tolerated. That stern warning from Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi.
If you think you're going to scam people during this tragedy, you're not. GoFundMe, they're monitoring every site that's popping up, and no money will be dispersed under GoFundMe until they know it's legitimate.
A legitimate campaign from the Broward Education Fund has raised more than $600,000 in just 13 hours. Attorney General Jeff Sessions vowing to step up federal gun prosecution in the wake of Wednesday's shooting.
I think effective enforcement of our gun laws, focusing on criminals and dangerous people, can reduce violence in our communities and improve public safety. We can and we must do better.
Sessions also promising to work with the mental health profession to assist in those efforts. The Justice Department, meantime, reporting a 23% increase in federal gun charges under the new administration. Mitt Romney expected to announce his run for Senate today. The former Massachusetts governor and 2012 Republican nominee for president expected to chase the Utah seat left open by the retiring Orrin Hatch. Romney, who has been critical of President Trump, previously planned an announcement for yesterday, but rescheduled after that shooting in Florida. It is 10 minutes after the hour. The shooter's shocking Instagram posts detailing a twisted obsession for guns, violence, and even hurting animals. Dr. Michael Baden, a forensic pathologist, is here next to delve deeper into the role social media will play in determining why he did it. Applause for a cold-blooded killer. The disgusting video showing inmates cheering on a cop killer. And senators on both sides calling out President Trump after hitting a wall on immigration.
The only way I see a solution is for the president to grab the reins back.
There's only one reason why the Senate will be unable to reach a bipartisan solution to DACA: President Trump.
The blistering response from the White House. We are live in Washington. Investigators now pouring through the Parkland shooter's social media footprint, trying to learn everything about him. What clues are they looking for, and how will this investigation help stop future attacks? Joining me now is forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden. Thank you for being here this morning. Tough circumstances for sure. We were just talking in the break about how important it is to begin that he's alive, that he was that this police officer, this hero police officer, was able to take him into custody without incident.
He should be given an awful lot of credit for taking him into custody alive, because that happens very rarely. Most mass shooters get shot or kill themselves, and they're going to be able to study him, to talk to him. He seems to be willing to talk, to find out which of the many red flags are most important, because the FBI gets deluged with tips. Which tips are most important, how it happened. They also will be determining whether or not he acted alone, whether there was anybody else. And they'll do that in part talking to him, and in part going over the DNA with fingerprints and DNA over the gun, the ammunition, the cartridges, and everything that was in his backpack that would have clues. So they will check out everything that he says.
Now, let's talk about his online footprint right now, specifically the YouTube comment that he made talking about, and he even said and used his real name in this post, and you can see it right there. It says, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." Yesterday, the FBI addressed this. There have been a lot of questions about this. As you know, people are very angry about this. And the FBI claims there wasn't enough information to connect the online Nikolas Cruz to the real-life human being. I don't understand. Can you help us?
Well, I would think that the FBI is going back into that area and to see if there is any way they could have tracked him down. The problem is they get so many clues. There are only so many they can track down. There are a lot of people who make stupid comments. Most of them, most people don't act on them.
Right, but, and forgive me for interrupting, you look at that comment, you look at the posts he had on his Instagram, on his other social media accounts, pictures of guns, of knives, of dead animals. What are we missing?
Well, it's said that at 18 you're able to buy long guns, but you're still not able to buy handguns. And the photographs of his array of weapons, he has some handguns. So there's a whole issue there of how he collected the guns, whom he purchased them from. The sadness is, with all these stories about mental problems, he had never been adjudged to be mentally ill in a way that would affect his purchasing weapons. But the whole area of why 18-year-olds should be able to buy assault weapons is going to be addressed.
What is law enforcement doing right now?
Law enforcement the police don't want, the police I know that I've worked with, they don't want people to be able to easily get guns. There's now a real divide between the National Rifle Association and the rest of society as to what strictures, if any, should be placed upon people buying weapons. And this has brought it out again, and maybe this time, since he's alive, since they can get more information for him, they'll be able to work out something in that direction.
Well, this is a debate that is unfortunately going to continue in the days to come, the weeks to come. We thank you for being with us this morning.
And I hope I don't have to come back for a similar situation in the near future.
We hope that as well. Thank you,
Thank you.
Doctor. The YouTuber who alerted the FBI about a possible suspect months before the shooting, now breaking his silence.
It was disturbing that somebody would write something like that, but I never would have thought that they meant it.
How he says the feds reacted to his warning. And the immigration debate hits a wall in the Senate. What the president has to say about where we go from here. We are live in Washington. Griff Jenkins joins us next. Good morning and welcome back. A bipartisan immigration plan fails in the Senate after President Trump threatens to veto it. DHS even slamming it, saying it destroys their ability to remove illegal immigrants from the country. But the House is moving forward with their hardline bill. Griff Jenkins is live in Washington, D.C. with a look at what's happening. Good morning, Griff.
Good morning, Jillian. They are your Cleveland Browns of the federal government. The Senate going 0-4 to pass anything to protect Dreamers and strengthen border security, including the bipartisan bill that had the support of 8 Republicans. But the president called a total catastrophe, threatening a veto. The White House placing blame on the Democrats, saying today the Schumer Democrats in the Senate demonstrated again that they are not serious about DACA. They are not serious about immigration reform, and they are not serious about Homeland Security. Continuing, they say, yet the Schumer Democrats chose to filibuster it because they are held hostage by the radical left in their party, which opposes any immigration control at all. But Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says the president is the one to blame.
I regret that the only bipartisan effort of the group of moderate senators to come up with a bipartisan compromise couldn't get the necessary 60 votes. There's only one reason why the Senate will be unable to reach a bipartisan solution to DACA: President Trump.
3 Democrats crossed the aisle on the Grassley bill, which most closely aligned with the president's 4 pillars, but it also received the most votes against it. Senator Graham now says the ball is in the president's corner.
The only way I see a solution is for the president to grab the reins back and lead himself and get Democrats and Republicans in a room focusing on strong border security and a fair solution for DACA. Get that done, then move to comprehensive.
Now, the House will take the next crack at it with the most conservative bill yet on the deck, but lawmakers in recess now until February 26th, and that March 5th deadline for Dreamers is fast approaching, Jillian.
That was a cheap shot at the Browns fans there, Griff.
It's true. They're winless.
It is true. I know. One day they will win a couple of games, and they will be very excited. Thanks, Griff. So remember The View co-host Joy Behar attacking Vice President Mike Pence's faith?
It's one thing to talk to Jesus. It's another thing when Jesus talks to you.
Exactly.
That's called mental illness.
Well, now she's addressing those outrageous comments, noting that she is a Christian, too.
I give money to the church. Yeah. You know, I mean, I actually help Christians with my pocketbook.
The conservative voice of The View, Meghan McCain, chiming in her frustration, only to be cut off. Listen.
I feel like sometimes liberals say we need to be tolerant of everyone, we need to be tolerant of everyone except pro-lifers, except Trump supporters.
I'm going to stop you because that's not actually true.
McCain continued to say the women on the show owe the vice president and his family an apology. What would the women from The View think of this? Oprah says she's not running in 2020 because God didn't tell her to.
Never looked outside for other people to tell me when I should be making a move. Mm-hmm. And wouldn't I know? Because if God actually wanted me to run, wouldn't God kind of tell me? And I haven't heard that.
Oprah claiming in an interview with 60 Minutes that she had a lot of wealthy men offer to run her presidential campaign. But while she feels a responsibility to use her voice to promote justice in the world, she says politics isn't in her DNA. It is 26 minutes after the hour. Applause for a cold-blooded killer. The disgusting video showing inmates cheering on the man suspected of murdering a police officer. Democrats demanding more gun control just hours after the Florida shooting rampage.
But as a consequence of our inaction, we are responsible.
There will be a moment of silence. Then the Congress of the United States will do absolutely nothing.
Our next guest, an NRA commentator, makes the case for more guns in the hands of the right people. Stay right there.
And welcome back. We are here in Parkland, Florida, right outside of the high school where this horrific shooting happened earlier this week. And we have learned, of course, now that this clearly disturbed 19-year-old young man that committed this terrible act was able to legally buy this AR-15, this semi-automatic rifle that was used to kill 17 people inside of this school just about 40 hours ago. And the question becomes, what do we do to prevent these types of things? And we're going to go now to NRA commentator Antonia Okafor with her reaction to this. Antonia, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I want to start with a Democratic senator from Connecticut, Chris Murphy, said this week that these types of shootings, these types of killings only happen here in the United States, and he points to our love of guns in this country as the reason. I want to get your reaction to that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. First, my condolences to the victims' friends and family. But no, these things do not happen here. It's not unique to America. In fact, according to the Crime Prevention Research Center, of the 25 worst mass shootings, those that had 15 or more fatalities, only 2 of them actually occurred in the U.S. And of the 66 highest worst mass shootings in the world, 59 of those 66 actually happened outside of the U.S. So we're going to hear this narrative that we're going to continue to hear that only this stuff happens in America, and that's not true. It's not the correlation that we always hear that more guns equals more violence. Contrary to the fact, that's why the NRA is here, to make sure that those who are empowered are law-abiding citizens. So when we do have tragedies like this, we have those who come, the good guys come, to be able to stop the bad guys with the guns.
Yeah. And you say that, you would like to see more people that are willing to do good and are trying to prevent these things have weapons, be armed themselves. My question to you is, it's one thing to have a right to bear arms and to have a pistol, on you if you want to defend yourself, or maybe a rifle in your home or a shotgun in your home or something like that. It's another thing to have an AR-15 that's capable of killing 17 people in a matter of 3 or 4 minutes. Do we really need weapons like this in the hands of civilians, a weapon with this capability?
Well, I would disagree. I would say yes, we do. In fact, we've had many people who are on the right side, again, the good guys with firearms, who have actually kept mass shootings from continuing. We see in Sutherland Springs with South Texas, when a former NRA firearms instructor used a rifle in order to stop the perpetrators. So there are time and time again where people who are on the good side. A semi-automatic, which means one shot per trigger pull. That's all that means. So yes, we've seen other people with AR-15 platforms many times who are been able to defend those who need defending. I mean, that's what it comes down to, is people who are waiting for the police to come, the good guys with guns to come. We're just saying, why don't we make sure that those who have already passed the permits and the regulations requirements to have a firearm off campus, make sure that they are able to do so on campus. So we'd have no more gun-free zones.
Understood. Antonio, what would you say to an idea of much stricter background checks on weapons like this, instead of, just a test that this clearly disturbed young man could get through because he had no prior criminal record? What if it was like a sit-down interview? What if it was a process, more of a process, to get your hands on a weapon that can do the kind of carnage that we saw here? It takes police a couple, 3 minutes to get to a scene. In 3 minutes, this young man shot over 30 people and killed 17. Would you agree to a much stricter route for these people to get these weapons, these types of weapons?
I think that, President Trump did a great job when addressing the fact that it's time to have a conversation about mental health and mental illness. And so I think that's what really what it needs to go to right now. We've been doing the same thing over and over again for decades. People are calling for more gun control now, but yet we still continue to see not only these fatalities, but it increasing. And so I think what President Trump has on the agenda and what Governor Scott does as well, I think is what's going to really be what we need for the future.
Yeah, well, it certainly is an issue of mental health. That is, there's no question there. Antonia, thank you so much for coming on this morning, and the debate on whether or not it is a gun issue as well will continue. And Jillian, we'll send it back to you.
Yes, it will. Thank you, Rob. Broward County, Florida officials now worried about copycats after Wednesday's shooting, revealing that threats were made at nearby schools.
We'll investigate this and charge anyone accordingly with the maximum charge we possibly could for doing something so horrific, so pathetic.
Authorities also looking into this chilling photo shared on social media threatening, quote, Florida Part 2 tomorrow. The post was traced to South Carolina, where an arrest was made. The FBI tipped off about the Florida school shooter's deadly plans months ago. A YouTuber says he contacted the feds in September after a user named Nicholas Cruz wrote on his video, quote, I'm going to be a professional school shooter. Blogger Ben Benight says local FBI agents interviewed him the very next day.
They're very responsive. They came out very polite, professional. They got the information. They got a copy of the screenshot, wrote down, information, questions they asked me. It was disturbing that somebody would write something like that, but I never would have thought that they meant it.
The FBI says they were unable to identify the person who made that comment. Still, a lot of people have more questions about that. And we're going to talk to that YouTuber, Ben Benight, live at 6:15 Eastern. So stay tuned for that. Disturbing surveillance video showing inmates applauding the man accused of murdering a Chicago police commander. You can see them behind bars as officers walk with Shamari Leggett, the convicted felon charged with first-degree murder, denied bail in court. He's accused of gunning down Commander Paul Bauer while running from the cops. Bauer, a 31-year veteran of the force, leaves behind a wife and daughter. The inmates who clapped will likely face consequences. The flu vaccine offering little protection against the deadly virus that's sweeping the nation. The CDC releasing preliminary figures suggesting the vaccine is only 36% effective in fighting the flu and only 25% effective against the deadliest strain. The agency saying that's because it's capable of taking over a person's immune system much quicker. The CDC still urging people to get a flu shot, saying kids between 6 months and 8 years old respond to the vaccine much better than adults. It is 5:37 on the East Coast right now. A rainy day in store for us out here. We have Janice Dean live in the studio to tell us what you're in store for today. Hey, Janice.
Hi, good morning, Jillian. Yes, and a wintry mix as we head into the weekend. We've got this boundary set up. You can see it clearly on our current temperatures. Warmer ahead of the boundary and cooler behind it. And along this boundary is where we're going to see these areas of low pressure. In a lot of places, it's going to be heavy rain, especially as we head into next week. So flooding is going to be a concern for the eastern half of the country. But this weekend, the temperatures are going to get cooler across the Northeast, and that means the potential for snow. So let's take a look at the future radar. This is a quick mover. It's going to be in and out Saturday, Sunday, but it is going to be bringing measurable snow across the I-95 corridor, including New York City up towards Boston and interior sections of the Northeast. So again, that's happening Saturday into Sunday, and then this will be out of here. But my other concern is, along with the snow, is the very heavy rain we're going to get across areas of the Tennessee River Valley, the Ohio River Valley, and the Mississippi River Valley over the next couple of days. So keep in tune with your forecast, and we will keep you updated. Back to you, Jillian.
All right. As always, thank you, Janice.
Of course.
It is 38 minutes after the hour. We've seen and heard the horrifying moments. 17 people were gunned down in cold blood at a Florida high school.
Oh my God!
3 students who took shelter in a dark closet are here to tell their incredible story of survival. That's next. Iran may be spying on millions of people through smartphone apps. According to a new report, they're easily available to download on Apple's iTunes Store and Google Play. The National Council of Resistance of Iran is accusing an Islamic military group of creating several spyware-enabled apps in hopes of preventing political uprisings. The report specifically citing Instant Messenger app Mobogram as a weaponized application monitored by the Iranian regime. Twitter will soon broadcast local breaking news in an attempt to curb the spread of misinformation. The social media giant saying they will partner with local news channels to air their coverage alongside users' timelines during big events. The company tested the feature on Wednesday, streaming live news coverage of the Florida school shooting. Twin brothers now facing major charges after allegedly enlisting students to help build bombs. Former New York City teacher Christian Toro and his twin brother Tyler pleading not guilty to unlawfully making bombs. The FBI arresting the two after a bomb-making manual was found on Christian Toro's school-issued laptop when he resigned. The feds also finding 30 pounds of explosive materials in his apartment. Police say the teacher paid at least 2 students to break apart fireworks to extract the explosive powder. Their motive remains unclear. An American flag is ripped down and replaced with an ISIS flag outside a Utah high school. But the disrespectful vandal didn't stop there. A message reading, quote, "ISIS is Comey," spray painted on the side of the school. A neighbor living across the street couldn't believe his eyes.
7 seconds. That flag
represents our country. I just can't imagine anybody wanting to do anything to that flag.
The FBI says the incident was not carried out by someone in the terror group. The suspect is still unknown. Rob Schmidt live on the scene with students who barricaded themselves in a closet. That's next. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Steve Doocy in New York. Coming up on Fox and Friends in a dozen minutes, we're going to have the Attorney General for the great state of Florida, Pam Bondi, is going to be joining us to talk about where the investigation goes from here. Also, a spiritual advisor to President Donald Trump, Paula White, joins us. How to make sense of the tragedy at that high school in Parkland. And also, you're going to meet that YouTube video blogger who says he warned the FBI about a school shooting threat from a user with the same name as the shooter back in September. What happened? We're trying to figure it out. It's now a dozen minutes before the top of the hour. Let's go down to Parkland, Florida. And there's Rob. Rob?
Yeah, hey, Steve, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Right outside the high school here. And as this story continues, as we learn more and more and more, we've got a couple of young men here who actually survived this shooting and actually had to hide from this shooting to get out. This is John and Adam joining us here this morning. And guys, you certainly didn't have to get up this early in the morning. I really appreciate you doing this for us because it's such a terrible story.
No problem.
And I know what you've been through this week. I can only even imagine. For you guys to be as well-tempered as you are right now is just incredible to me. Give me a little bit of your story, John. You guys were in the auditorium. Is that right?
Yeah, so me and a couple of friends were in working for our school production, which is coming up soon. Sure. So we're working on our lights. We didn't have a teacher with us because usually she lets us go out on our own to work on the lights as she's in the classroom helping teach. So we've heard the second alarm, which was kind of alarming because we usually never have two fire alarms in that day.
The same day.
Yeah, so we were confused. So we're like, obviously it must be a real fire. Then our assistant principal comes on the intercom, says, "Evacuate now, evacuate." And that's actually supposedly our code word for code red, which means there's a shooter on campus. However, all of us,
really?
we walk outside as per usual for our fire drill, and we hear people screaming, "Code red, get inside now, code red." So we go to our closest shelter, which was the band hallway. We run inside to one of the classrooms where our assistant principal, Miss Reed, was. There was maybe 70 to 100 kids shoved into this room. A bunch of them were shaking. We didn't know what we were doing. It was a lot of confusion, but...
And were you guys together at this point? Were you guys in the same room?
At first, I was actually, we did a fundraiser to deliver flowers across campus. And literally like 2 minutes before everything went down, I was out on campus. I was in the building. I was, giving people flowers, for a day that was supposed to be all about, exactly, it was supposed to be all about just sharing love and friendship and things like that. And I was there. And then, literally 2 minutes later to be, finished delivering these flowers and walking back to my classroom to, hear this alarm go off. It was
Could you hear the gunshots? I mean, what could you make out? You were in a different building than where the bullets were flying, right? You were in the auditorium.
We were in a different building, yes. We were so, believe it or not, the auditorium is so close to that building, and there was just so many things going on that you can't even tell. I remember just shaking. I couldn't, realize, is this a drill? Is this not? I didn't hear gunshots. I heard screaming. We were close to, I guess, where the SWAT team set up their base. We were right outside because there was a door that we were right by.
Right.
And we just heard them screaming, saying, "Someone's shot in the leg. We need a predicate." All these crazy things, and we're like, this has to be
a pure panic.
Yeah.
And this football coach that we've been talking about, this hero football coach that went in and threw his body in front of the bullets to save these kids. You both knew of this coach. You're not on the football team, but you said you had seen him just before this all happened. Tell me about that.
Minutes before, as I was walking from the classroom to the auditorium, he was stationed outside in in his golf cart because all the security guards have golf carts, and he was sitting there just like patrolling the area. I gave him a wave, just an innocent one, not even thinking anything of it. And then it's crazy that a couple minutes after he would be risking his own life and for students, which is unbelievable.
It's a terrible story, and I can't even fathom what you guys have been through, and I wish you the best. I absolutely do. You're some great young men, and thank you so much for coming on this morning. John, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Adam, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, guys. All right. Jillian, we're going to send it back to you.
A lot of brave people, a lot of brave heroes, stories that we're hearing coming out of this. Thank you, Rob. We're also getting our first look at the faces of the victims of that horrific Florida high school massacre. Omar Lewis from our Fox affiliate WSVN is live outside the hospital in Deerfield Beach, Florida, with the latest update on the victims' conditions. Omar.
Yeah, Jillian, good morning. This community, as we've been hearing, trying to make sense of this tragedy after those 17 people were killed during the Valentine's Day school shooting. 14 of those victims are children. This morning, we are seeing their faces, hearing from their families, and learning how they want their loved ones remembered. The youngest victim here, just 14 years old. We'll take you to video now. Everyone we spoke to remembering these victims and telling us that they had big plans and big futures ahead. Several of them were athletes, musicians, dancers, and the type of people who gave back to this community. Last night, hundreds of people gathering in Parkland to mourn at a candlelight vigil. Parents of some of those students killed taking to the podium, sharing their grief while demanding better safety in school. And you just heard those students just a moment ago mentioning Coach Aaron Feis. He's the football coach who died shielding students from danger, a man who this community says will now forever be their hero. Back out here live at the hospital, the latest update we received, 9 people still remain hospitalized at this point. But the good news here, doctors say they do expect them to fully recover. Meanwhile, family members of 15-year-old Alyssa Al-Hadaf tell us that they have scheduled her funeral for later today. That is the very latest here in Deerfield Beach this morning. We'll send it back to you.
Omar, thank you very much. It is 7 minutes until the top of the hour. Saved with seconds to spare. How the Florida shooter gave one student a warning just seconds before opening fire. Plus, the ROTC student who helped shield dozens of students with his shield.